Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on YouTube. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it, especially if you love the movies?
Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD
major platforms. I think we messed that up.
Video on demand, or as they say in the trade, VOD.
VOD. Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD platforms,
which means
video on demand.
Look how you know. You must be a high school graduate.
I'm a college graduate.
Really?
Yes.
I got an honorary degree from Hofstra. Did you get an honorary degree?
No, I got a degree.
Oh, well, I got honorary. You know, I'm in the Jewish Museum.
What for?
What do you mean? As a famous Jew in the Bronx. I'm in the famous...
I'm in the Prospect Park in the Stones.
How big is the stone?
Hello, and welcome to Midnight Metal.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude. Whatever names you want to hang on me. You know, I don't make up these names, you do. And I'm happy to just take the mantle of them. This is Midnight Metal 67 times 2. There was another 67, but you know what? Obliterated by the timeline. Amazing. It happens sometimes. Sometimes a Midnight Metal falls into oblivion, never to be heard from again. That's why this show's as metal as it is. Metal as fuck. I hope you're feeling metal. Now tonight, of course, we've got the March of you heard, and Lael, who will be here, Lael Rockwell, who will be here soon. And again, you know, as you all know, I am obsessed with storytelling. I'm obsessed with how storytelling, how we define our lives by it, how it's infected our political discourse, how storytelling is really how we convey basic human truths to one another. We all have our own narratives about our own lives, you know, and this show, if nothing else, this entire channel really is about a love of stories. And to start with, you know who I've got here? I have her. You know her. You love her. Bring her on. How are you doing? Welcome to Midnight Metal, and are you feeling fucking metal tonight? Are you feeling metal?
Of course, Robert, it's Midnight Metal. It's Midnight Metal. Of course I'm feeling metal. How are you tonight?
I am good. You know, I'm good. Things are as one of the characters in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome once said, dice are rolling. So meaning stuff's, you know, you throw the dice, stuff's happening. Things are going on. You just never know. Oh, you know what? Lael is trying to get in here, and apparently he doesn't have the link. I thought I sent him the link. So that is my bad. Wait, I did send you. Oh, you know what? Well, fuck no. Lael, I didn't send you the link. And what a douche move that is. That's what Dieter Basham would say. I guess I put it on the different thing. I am sorry for that. I am sorry, Lael. Here it is. I can't believe it. I sent him the story, though. I sent him the story I wanted to read tonight. And we will bring on Lael Rockwell. By the way, I got to say, if you haven't subscribed to the 1/6 Scale Man on YouTube, I encourage everybody who watches this show, everybody should run over and subscribe to the 1/6 Scale Man on YouTube. Lael Rockwell, he calls me smooth. I don't know where he gets that from, because I am not nearly as smooth as this cat is. Come on now. I mean, Lael Rockwell is one of the smoothest guys I've ever met, and one of my new favorite people. When I look back at 2021, one of my favorite things that I've had happen to me is stream with and Lael Rockwell, and to meet 1/6 Scale Man, and let me just get him into the damn show and find out if Lael's feeling fucking metal tonight. I always feel bad, like he's like a dad and stuff, but he says fuck, so I guess I can say fuck. I don't, but he says it. He's like a PG. He uses the word PG. I use the word fuck in a PG way. So like you get in a movie. By the way, welcome Lael Rockwell, and I will ask Lael, are you feeling fucking metal tonight? It's 3:00 in the morning where you are. How metal are you?
Definitely am feeling fucking metal tonight. How are you doing?
See, but you use metal in a PG way, which I like. Because although I gotta say you were getting a little spicy the other night when you were going off, you were, which I very much appreciated. You're a man of your passions, as we are on Midnight Metal.
Yes,
I like seeing you unleash. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm here for that.
Every now and then, I think we have to every now and then. We just have those moments where we do it, and then we just kind of bring it back in. We reel it back in. So yeah, it's just a moment. It was just a moment.
I gotta tell you, because nobody knows this, so I get contacted by somebody I really don't know on Twitter, and this person, let me identify them. I don't even know if they watch Midnight Metal, and his Twitter handle is C4Art_com, Chris,
Okay.
Chris C, and he writes me and he says, "Hi Rob, I want to mail you something I think you would like. Hint, it's 1/6 related." And he asked if she should send it to the P.O. box in Iowa or is there one in California. I'm like, bro, you say something's 1/6, send it to me direct, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and then he sent it to me. He says, "Thanks, Rob. I'm sending it out by FedEx tomorrow. You should get it soon. I'm just outside of San Francisco, so it shouldn't take long. The box still has Sideshow tape on it."
Okay.
So I'm like, I don't know what it is. And then he doesn't say anything, right? Now, I don't know if you know that I have the figure of Carl Urban as Judge Dredd from the Judge Dredd movie.
Yes, you do.
I'm a huge fan. Well, they did make a Judge Anderson, his female partner, that I never got.
Okay.
Well, I got to go full frame on this. So this is what came in the mail. The new Epoch Cop, I Am the Law. And it is, in fact, Judge Anderson from the Judge Dredd movie. Yep. And you know what? I haven't taken it out yet. I'll wait. But it's the same company that made the awesome Carl Urban Judge Anderson. I mean, the Judge Dredd figure. It's awesome. And I just wanted to read this letter that he wrote me. Chris C. Hi, Rob. I found this while I was out and about looking for 6 scale figures, and I know it was something you were looking for. The place had 2 of them, so of course I picked up the other one for myself. Laugh out loud. I just wanted to give you something back for all the great entertainment you've given with your various streams. Whether it be ranting about Star Trek Discovery on Robservations, sharing your love of physical media with Dieter, or my personal favorite, Hot Toys Fully Articulated with Az. I love the positivity of the show with all the negativity going on these days with our beloved fandoms. I hope you enjoy it. And, you know, it's funny because this is something that I mentioned a while ago. Like, you would have to be you'd have to be a long time watcher to know, because I can't reach him, but I've got my Carl Urban figure is right over there. I also have a badass figure of Stallone as Judge Dredd from the 90s movie. But, you know, I can't, you know, we've always talked about how fortunate we are to have our viewers and the generosity people show us and things like that. And that never ceases to amaze me. And I'm always amazed and thankful for the generosity that the viewers show, but also the thoughtfulness. I mean, this is kind of, I would call this a deep cut. And really, really nice. So Chris C., I don't know if you're watching Midnight Metal, but thank you, sir. This was totally unexpected. Like, I thought it was going to be, you know, I don't know, a hat. I didn't expect some kind of a great, not only a great figure, but a rare figure. Now, of course, I have to find the 6 scale Lawmaster. And by the way, Chris C., the Lawmaster is Judge Dredd's motorcycle, which is something I've been looking for, but it's really hard to find. So,
you know, and I'm glad with this, it's amazing. We get, you know, such good people in the community, and sometimes, like I said, they just want to show their support. And they give back in ways that you're like, well, no, I'll pay you for it. You know, I definitely would actually pay you. And they insist that you don't, and to the point where they don't give you any information. They don't want you to send them anything. They just want to send you stuff just to show their appreciation. And it does basically. And the thing is, it's like we give back as well. You know, we give back. We have giveaways. We have certain things that, you know, and if it's not something that we give back, you know,
charity events.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it doesn't even have to be a material, anything materialistic, and it can be just, you know, words of encouragement, and, you know, invite them, and, you know, getting them, you know, into a space where they can really express themselves and feel like they're, you know, they have a place. So, you know, there's so many different ways we give back to each other. So it's a good thing, man. Definitely.
Yeah, and you know, I've had charity giveaways, and now charities make it really easy for YouTubers, because when people tip you or super chat you, you can have that go directly to the charity. Yeah. Instead of coming through you. And I haven't done it in a while. I didn't do it for the 700 show really, but I for the 400 show, the 500 show that I did for Observations, I had these big blowouts.
Yeah.
For my 800 show, I'm going to have a big blowout. And I think I'm going to have different charities for every hour that I'm on, because I'm going to try and stream for 800 minutes. Because I did 400 minutes for the 400 show. I did 500 minutes. I think for the 700 show, I did like 11 hours or something.
Okay.
And I'm going to, you know, have guests on and do all that. Yeah. But it's pretty cool. And, of course, tomorrow, if you're a member of the channel, we do these membership chats. And at 11 o'clock tomorrow, my time, if you're a member of the channel, we're doing a Zoom chat, and they're really cool because I get to see everybody's faces. And, you know, there's people whose kids have gone into the military since we've been doing this, and now they're Black Hawk pilots, you know, and it's cool. And like, you get to know, and I've loved getting to know people, you know, like Tom Jr. Jackson. We're all goof people. It's great to get to know people, because I feel like, you know, if I was ever on the lam from the law, I could call people up. I could be like, Tom, dude, the popo's after me. I got to make a cross country. I got to make a cannonball run to your house. Can I hole up for a while? And he'd be like, Bob, Rob, you can do it. Come on. Yeah. We're all goof people. My mom it's fine. Yeah. I'm like, she's not going to sell me out, is she? No. It'll be good. And we could just watch. We can just watch physical media. It'd be great. No one would know, and I could still stream from his house. It'd be fantastic.
As long as they're not, you know, I forget his name. From what was it, Cloverfield 2? The movie.
Oh yeah, John Goodman.
John Goodman.
Yeah. But he was right, man. He was saving everybody from the aliens.
Yeah, he was.
That's on the you know.
In his own special way, he was.
What do you mean special? What special way is that? But so anyway, you know, I sent you guys an article. I did not. So I read this about this. I read this article on Quillette, the universal structure of storytelling, by Jonathan Gottschall. and it's from his book, and I'd never heard of him. And I love this. I love when I find, because I scour the internet all the time for interesting articles, or I just do like searches for things I'm interested in, and find the internet. One of the greatest things about the internet is if you're a curious person, and I like sometimes I'll be like, how fast does grass grow?
Yeah.
I don't know. You water it. How fast? Like, how many inches does it grow? I'm not saying. I'm just saying. I'm using that. Just first thing that came into my head. You can find out. You can actually find out how fast does grass grow. Type it into Google. Boom. You'll get like 10 articles right away and explain it. And I love that about the modern age. I wish I was like, I don't know, 8. If I had the internet when I was 8, my mom used to tell me to shut up. Because when I was in the 2nd grade, I had to tell her everything I learned at school. Mom, you're never going to believe this. I can't imagine what it was like. This is amazing. The Declaration of Independence is incredible. My mom's like, and she finally 2 weeks into 2nd grade, she told me to shut up at dinner. She didn't want to hear it anymore. She's like, I'm very excited that you're inquisitive, but shut the fuck up. We want to eat dinner in peace. Go watch Star Trek. And, it was good. So
you were just a very inquisitive person, so you couldn't help that, bro.
I couldn't help it. And to be fair, my parents have been very indulgent in my life, but I can only imagine, my mom, because I'd be like, Mom, you're never going to believe this. She'd be like, actually, I would believe it. Yeah. I believed it when I learned it when I was in the 2nd grade too. So this book is really interesting. I looked it up. It just came out last month in November. It's called The Story Paradox: How Our Love of Storytelling Builds Societies and Tears Them Down. Yeah. And this article is really, really interesting. And it was in Quillette. You know what? I'll put the article in the, so I won't read very much because who wants to hear me read? It's Midnight Metal. So I'm going to put this article. It's just an excerpt from the book. And here it is. But it's really interesting. He says, the author, Jonathan Goschel, says, in the mid-2000s, I set out along with my colleagues, Joseph Carroll, John Johnson, and Dan Kruger, on a large-scale study of classic Victorian novels by such authors as Jane Austen, George Eliot, and Charles Dickens, among many others. We distributed a survey to hundreds of knowledgeable people, professors, grad students taking courses on Victorian literature, and authors who had published books in the field. The respondents rated the attributes of characters in the novel exactly as if these fictional people were real, actual people. And we wrote up the results in our book, Graphing Jane Austen, the Evolutionary Basis of Literary Meaning. Now, here's the thing. When I'm reading this article, I'm like, bruh, every one of us, like the idea was we wanted to know if the respondents rated the attributes of characters in the novels exactly as if these fictional people were actual people. Okay, let's take Star Wars, for instance. Let's take Star Trek. Let's take Doctor Who. Let's take Jaws, Jurassic Park. Let's take our favorite fucking movies, our favorite TV shows. I know, you know, we all know, those people are real. They are real. And one of the reasons that people get pissed off in like Last Jedi or something, like, Luke wouldn't act that way.
Yeah. Because
we know how Luke would act. Why do we know how Luke would act? Because he's real, man. He's real. And what's interesting is, now our Judeo-Christian civilization is based in storytelling.
Yeah.
We if you look at the Old and the New Testament, those stories, or the Quran, or a lot of other religious tomes, those books are all filled with stories. And those books say that, yeah, these people were real, man. Yeah. They existed. And whether they did or not, they've still shaped our culture for thousands of years. And yet, I've never met anyone. Like, one of my favorite biblical Bible stories I talk about all the time is the story of Job. I love the story of Job. About Job's faith in God. Like, all this terrible shit happened. And Job, he kept his faith. and he was rewarded for it. And I love that story. And even Clive Barker did a riff on that story called The Yattering and Jack. You know, so biblical stories, they're real, man. Star Wars is real. So my question to you guys is, you gal and guy.
Yes.
So we, imagination connoisseurs, define our lives through the stories we love. That's why we're imagination connoisseurs.
Yeah.
And I've always maintained that even though we know that we love fictional stories, the best fictional stories have to seem real. They have to present us with verisimilitude. We have to buy into them. And when our stories lose that, we get angry.
Definitely.
So I would ask the two of you to weigh in on this idea, because we all have our favorite novels. We all have our favorite, even your favorite like concept album. As much as I love Styx, I'm not going to go with Mr. Roboto on this, but like something like, you know, the Who's Tommy. That's a great concept album, you know, or Quadrophenia, or the Pink Floyd The Wall, telling a story, you know, and those stories become, we internalize them and they become a part of our lives, and they define who we are. We identify with fictional characters that don't exist, but in our minds they do. They're real. Yeah. Who's to say? I mean, Star Wars could be a historical documentary. It happens a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I don't know. It didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd be curious. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I have a lot to say about this, and I'm very excited about this particular topic because, you know, I think that one thing that it does is that it forces you to focus on why we do have disappointments when we have a story that follows the traditional trope and then is torn apart by a non-traditional trope. So, you know, you talked about how these characters, essentially these characters that we're reading about and learn about, do become part of our culture and part of our vernacular, meaning that we use them in reference in when we speak back and forth all the time. Yeah. And they have significance in regards to meaning. So like, for example, if I were to tell you that Grogu means so much to me, it's absolutely real. This is not something that's a fantasy. That character means a lot to me. And then it becomes even more meaningful with my cult members who are in the cult of Baby Yoda, and my friend Allison, who started a nonprofit business to provide, you know, toys and different things for children in need as a result of this character, as an inspiration from what they felt from, you know, this particular character. And I
just, you know, Grogu is fictional.
Well, he's fictional.
Just want to make sure.
I'm not going to. We're not having a discussion about whether Grogu is fictional or not, because
the thing
I'm not going to go there, Robert. For me, he is very real, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
I'm right there with you. I was just making a joke, but the thing is, what's interesting is my overarching point is that Grogu, it doesn't matter whether he's real or not. In our minds, in our imaginations, he exists.
Yes, he does. And what has happened, you know, as a spawn of this, and of course we see this in our fandom, right, gentlemen, where, you know, we all go further and maybe we join a group that has to do with a character that we love or a specific area. Like, think about the people in the 501st who, you know, will dress up in costume and cosplay. And this is very real to them. And they'll do duels where they're doing fundraisers for people or, you know, for charity. I mean, this is really turned into something that becomes a part of your life. Or let's say on the collector side, now you're collecting and you have a beautiful collection and you're enjoying it and sharing it with others. You know, this enjoyment is extending itself far beyond the original intention of the film, which was to, you know, look at the director's vision. So, you know, I think that when it starts to become a part of our lives, but it also becomes something that we accept. For example, everyone on Earth understands what it means to be frozen in carbonite. There is no person on Earth who doesn't understand what that means, whether you like Star Wars or not.
Well, if they survive the freezing process, that is.
Yes, everyone knows it. So even, you know, even as a joke, if you send out a meme it doesn't have to be Han Solo. It could be anyone who's frozen in carbonite, but everyone knows what that means. And it's become something that's so ingrained in our society that we understand it. And it is a real thing now. It is something that's real, and we can use it as a reference point. But one other thing that I think is very interesting about this particular article is that they chose to focus on literature that, it's very popular literature, right?
Right.
Jane Austen is a very popular author. And I, I'm one of those, Anglophiles who loves Jane Austen. And so one of the very interesting things that I thought was really cool about the way that she wrote is that she would use exactly that type of trope where she would have a character that would say, well, my idea of a great group is a variety of people with a liberality of ideas. And another character will say, well, that's not a great group. That's the best group. And of course, they're defining to you what that ideal is in this way that we're comfortable and we enjoy hearing about it. And so, I think looking at the examples that they have about this idea of good people and the protagonists and antagonists, I thought it was really good. One thing I was going to say that I really like about it is that if you look at a lot of Jane Austen's novels, you can see examples of what this author has put into the text. And like, for example, where in Sense and Sensibility, which is a Jane Austen story, how the young girl's actions, because she acts in a selfish manner, it disrupts everybody's life. And that's exactly what happens in the story. And it's not until she improves upon herself and decides, you know what, I'm not going to chase after this guy who clearly doesn't want me anymore. I'm going to go with this other really incredibly wealthy man who happens to just be standing in the wings. Of course it's unrealistic, but this is a trope that we're comfortable with. And another thing that I was going to say is that, they go further to talk about how Dunbar, who's another author, proposes that storytelling, and this is his quote, is just like other art forms. And the idea is that it enhances a sense of group solidarity. And I think an example of that is in The Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, that brings this group of 4 people together, or it's more than 4 people, but let's just say it brings people together here so that they can have this adventure, and you're going along with this adventure. And it's a very satisfying trope because we're accustomed to that. Now, the other thing that I was going to say is the final thing that I was going to say is that they talk about oral traditions, meaning oral storytelling, and how important that is. And of course, I immediately thought about the Eternals because they made a point of having a scene in the Eternals where we saw that oral tradition and how important it was. And, it's not fake. This is a real thing. And anthropologists have done studies in many cultures about the importance of oral storytelling. And even in oral storytelling, we see the same tropes. And it's a lot of times it's not moral, but moralistic. So I think what I think is very interesting about that is if we look at the Eternals, the idea of saving the people of Earth versus saving one celestial. For me, I wanted the celestial to emerge. But of course, the other...
What would happen to Earth? What would happen to our Hot Toys figures? Scattered into the sun.
We'd all die, I know, but I wanted to see it. Now, what's interesting about this is that it kind of gives you the choice yourself when you're watching it. Are you going to support the Eternals, or are you going to support the Celestial? And I really liked that part because, obviously I support the Celestial, but at the same time, looking at a classic story trope, if you decided that you were going to support the Eternal, then, the idea that Icarus flies into the sun, whether or not he is destroyed, is irrelevant. It's the idea, the seeing, the possibility that he had to destroy himself is very satisfying to someone who, knowing very well he didn't want, humans to survive, let's say. And so I think...
Well, I don't think he didn't... It's not that he didn't want humans to survive. He wanted his God. He wanted his creator to succeed.
Yes. And so, in other words, there's 2 sides to the story.
Yes.
It's either Cersei's choice or Icarus's choice. And what I liked about it was that even though we're not quite sure whether Icarus has actually killed himself, we're still satisfied with seeing him go off alone and kind of like be near the sun and possibly be damaged, and that feeds into this trope that we see in a lot of the storytelling. And the final thing that I was going to say is, sometimes these tropes, when they get broken down, can be a good story, but we don't want to see the original story broken down. I don't want you to break down Pride and Prejudice. I don't want you to. However, if you expand upon a similar theme, you can do that. So I use the example of Roma, that movie that was made, that won an Academy Award, I think for best foreign language film or something like that.
Yeah.
And the film won because it had the story of a Mexican woman who worked as a maid in a wealthy household and her experience there. But then a few years later, we ended up with another story called New Order. And I kind of felt like it was a continuation of it. New Order breaks it down, but it doesn't destroy Roma. And this is very interesting. We wouldn't want Roma destroyed. This was this was an autobiographical story of a man who grew up in a household where this maid was, and this meant something to him.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to go back into that story and mess it up by destroying that solitude that the story had. But New Order allows you to, because it takes place 20 years later, after the household, he's grown up, and now the maid is 20 years older, and she has a different perspective on life. She's not the same person anymore.
So I just love the fact that you've made Roma and New Order in a shared universe, and now I can never unsee that.
Well, it seems so obvious, and I don't know whether director's intention was this, but we've been getting such great cinema and stories, from that area of the world.
Oh yeah,
and I think that they also do tend to stay towards those classical tropes that we're looking for, as indicated in this article. But I also think that to do an analysis of that lifestyle correctly does not mean that you take the original story and rip it to shreds.
Well, no, okay. Well, let me ask Lael.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I've noticed you're a Star Wars fan.
Yes.
I mean, I can look at your and of course Star Wars classical storytelling. We all love Star Wars. The original trilogy, the Holy Trilogy, sacrosanct. But now we were given a story that was defined more by corporate interests, than the reality of storytelling, the verisimilitude of storytelling. Now, I would ask you. When it comes to something like The Last Jedi, I think a lot of us, you have multi-generations of kids that grew up, and Luke Skywalker, I think all of us, boys, girls, whatever, and I don't think, I identified with Ellen Ripley. Just because she's a woman doesn't mean I can't identify with her. I think all kids identified with Luke because he was a proxy to all children who looked at the twin setting suns or any setting sun wishing, boy, I wish I was in a place better than I am in right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you saw something like Last Jedi, and you saw the dismantling of Luke Skywalker's character, and in some cases, I love those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
But what did you think about it in terms of Luke and like what Mmmm was just saying? Does something like Last Jedi invalidate Luke Skywalker?
I think, okay, so to kind of touch on, because I wanted to kind of bridge the gap, especially even with the article itself and what it was saying. And
the floor is yours. Say what you want.
And how it kind of, how it makes sense to, how we see things now, and how it's portrayed even in film. The thing is, for us who grew up with, Star Wars, we got a hint of, before it was actually called New Hope, it was just Star Wars.
Just Star Wars. I don't call it New Hope.
Yeah, it was just
it's Star Wars.
It was basically given a chapter name once they decided that they were, making another film and two other films. And that was done years after the film was even made. But the intent of the director, the intent of George Lucas when he wrote the story, is how he made these characters real for us. Is that was a connection in so many different ways to even the different religions, and how he used source material of modern times to allow us to explore and connect with these characters, whether it was Hinduism, Buddhism, whether it was Islam, whether it was Christianity, whether it was Catholicism. He basically took
Bushido,
aspects of these religions and brought it into the art of storytelling. Even basically, if you look at the character designs, when you look at the Imperial, the Imperial Army, at that particular time, the Empire, The Imperial basically represented a sign of, if we look at, throughout history, you had Hitler, you had the Nazis. The suits were like a carbon copy or almost a design of what we actually saw, throughout history, or what we know about history when it comes to these particular characters. So my point is, when he writes, and when his story was written, our connective tissue was based on historical events or even religion. And that's how those characters were not just fictional characters, they became real. He brought them to life through the art of storytelling, but also connective tissue.
Yes.
Now we follow Luke's story, as a young man, as basically a kid, who was, on the planet of Tatooine, desert, like atmosphere, sand, which, basically he learned to really love itself. The twin sons, he was the average kid. He liked, there were teenagers, like they lived that nightlife of just basically, riding the sand speeders, like testing the speed limit, you know what I mean? Probably drinking at a cantina, stuff like that, sneaking out, doing different things. But he was the average teenager, but he dreamed beyond the stars, and he knew that it was a better life. Can life be better than this? This is what he wanted. And we saw this. So then when we actually discovered Ben Kenobi and how, Obi-Wan played a important and pivotal role to unlocking, and unlocking that part of Luke that was there, because you might as well when we look at Luke and we look at the Jedi, they're sort of like mutant-like, they have a mutation. The simple fact that they have a strong connection to the Force and Skywalkers in general. But when we look at Luke, we look at basically his journey. But the thing is, and I always tell people this, the story is chronicled, but the story and how we actually see it is documented not by the characters or the human characters, but by R2D2 and C3PO.
Yes, and that's how it was designed.
And that's how it was designed, because they have actually watched this story unfold since the very beginning. So we're actually seeing it through them and how it's basically played out and how it's chronicled. But when we look at Luke, and then his, like for instance, R2D2 is he's basically our connection to that world. But then R2 also communicates with Luke. So it's like, Luke communicates with R2 communicates with us. You know what I mean? In a sense. But the way I look at it is, we've watched Luke throughout the years from now what's called New Hope to Empire to Jedi. And what we actually saw was that hero's journey, where it was promising for him, where yes, he lost a lot, he went through a lot, he lost his family, or what he knew as his family, which was Aunt Beru, Uncle Owen, he lost Obi-Wan, he eventually loses Yoda, he watches his friends harm, but it was basically something that things that had to happen for him to grow into who we know he is, that hero. And this is what we ended with Jedi. Now we've actually seen some source material, some books that told the story of Luke, great stories of Luke, and how number one, he's passed on what he's learned to different individuals by still staying true to who he is and his beliefs. What Last Jedi did, and like we talked, like you said, it would have been good if we got a solid backstory before they introduced us to that film, because they just threw it in our faces.
Right.
This is Luke now, without really explaining too much of his history or the past of how he evolved to that. You can't just expect one or two scenes, flashbacks, to explain why Luke became who he was, because it was more than that. It was more than that had to have pushed him to that. So that was one of the reasons why Last Jedi put a very, very, a bitter taste in my mouth that I still can't get rid of. So it forced me to formulate my own narrative about Luke. It forced me to create my own narrative about Luke, and then to basically use one film to give us that version of Luke, but then kill him off at the same time. Spoiler alert to people who haven't seen it. Kill him off in that particular story, to me, was a tragedy. It was a travesty.
Well, I also think it's a betrayal. I mean, I think it's a betrayal. Like what I find so strange is that it never occurred to me. Like, of course, my whole thing, everyone knows I love Star Trek. And the funny thing to me about Star Trek was, when I was a kid, Star Trek was real. I mean, I knew it was a fictional TV series.
Yeah.
But because like what Star Trek did, and people forget this, but in 1975, they released two pieces of merchandising. One was the blueprints of the Enterprise, the actual, and the other was the Starfleet technical manual. But they released them in such a way that they, like, if you took out the actual book from the technical manual, the flyer that said from Star Trek, but you're supposed to slide it out, and it was printed. The whole thing was printed as if it actually came from the 23rd century.
Yeah.
All of it was presented to you as being in universe, as was the blueprint. So if you took out this from Star Trek, if you took that out of the packet, you have these blueprints, these deck plans of the Enterprise, but it was presented as if it was real. So when they came out, I was 8 or something, and I'm reading the articles of the Federation, and I'm looking at these highly technical drawings, and it wasn't like, look at the wacky stuff. I mean, it was really adult, and it looked real. And I'm 8, and this shit was, my imagination was on fucking fire.
Blown away, right?
I'm just looking at this. My parents would find me in my bedroom with the and they were fold outs. They were big blueprints, and they had it was all broken down as if it's real.
Yeah,
and it was really interesting because there was no pandering to me as a child. Like, it didn't matter whether I was 8, 18, 28, 38. They were designed for the person that had the imagination, that loved this stuff. There was no delineation like, well, we have to make this appeal to children. Look, it appealed to my 8-year-old self. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I'm like, and it made Star Trek, it was the first time it was like, this is real. Like the idea that somebody actually in the olden times before the Empire, that somebody would create marketing or create a product, create, merchandising, and the idea that they would make it come from the actual universe of the thing that you loved. So suddenly it went from your imagination to being something tangible. And even though it wasn't real, I mean, I knew it wasn't real. It was almost like it was LARPing, it was cosplaying, it was whatever you want to call it, and it felt real. And what it did was it was like a feedback loop, and it made my interest in Star Trek grow exponentially because you had people that were thinking of it in these kinds of terms. And in 1980, they released Star Trek Maps, and all it was 2 double-sided, huge fold-out maps of the galaxy, which was badass. But the craziest shit that came in this book was a book on stellar navigation. Like, how do you plot courses through 3-dimensional space? And it's printed on like newsprint. It's like a pamphlet. I still have it. I have it over there. It's the most crazy, insane. I mean, it was so sophisticated and it's like, oh no, 3-dimensional stellar navigation in the Star Trek universe is absolutely real. And I read this stuff, and it was like my brain was on fire. And I think part of the disappointment that I have in modern Star Trek is that they couldn't ever produce anything like that because there is no reality. Everything they've made, it's all fantasy. So they could never make something analogous. Like, part of my Star Trek fandom was always in tandem with these extra things that people were producing. And then even fans, after those blueprints came out, all through the 70s and 80s, you had other fans reproducing the blueprints in the exact same format of all of the other ships from the Star Trek universe that they would never produce. And so you had fans who were also, your fellow fans, they weren't professionals, but they were adding to this fictionalized reality. It was now we have it on our phones, augmented reality, but this was, and in my mind, it was absolutely real.
Yeah.
So then when we see a bad Star Trek story, for me, I'm like, I know whether it's good or bad. I'm like, well, that's That's a bad Star Trek story. And people are like, well, I liked it. And I'm like, bro, I got like 50 years on you and I can explain to you, but that's but I'm not right about it. If somebody likes a story, you can't tell them that they don't like it.
Tell them,
they like it.
They touched on the realism of, let's say, the fandom in the movie Galaxy Quest, and I like how they did it because there's a lot of scenes in it where I guess they need help in space, and the kids who are on Earth, they say, oh, I know how to do that. I know how to get you, fix your warp core or whatever it was. And it was just, you knew he had the blueprints in front of him or the manual or whatever it was.
Hey, I know it's a computer by then.
But the best part about it was that his mother wouldn't allow him to help them until he put the trash out. So, it's like, those fun things that we see like that. And I did want to mention, I wanted to comment on what Lael was saying about R2-D2, and this probably doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about, but since R2, was like, as you both had mentioned, the record keeper of the story, I remember looking at a comic or hearing something about how Luke found out about what had happened to his mother and father through R2. And, I always thought that was very sad because, if something tragic does happen in your parents' life, you don't want to see that, but he did see it. So, but he needed to know what had happened and not heard it, let's say, by hearsay or, in a sense, he's gone, like he needed to know the truth. And he saw that through R2 and, while it is very tragic, he needed to know the truth. So, but I always think about that and how sad that must be. R2 is a droid, but I think he has feelings too.
He absolutely has feelings.
Yeah, when he sees things that are upsetting, or like when he talked about how Anakin didn't talk to him anymore, that whole, that's when you have a friend and then they kind of withdraw from you. And I thought that was a very interesting aspect to put into R2. But
and when you think about it, you think about the tragedy of R2, because R2 was there when Anakin slaughtered the younglings. R2 was there when he watched some individuals who might even knew him or knew as the character itself, as the android, who we say basically had somewhat of an essence and a spirit within it, but that he was connected to. He watched his master or his friend at that particular time destroy everything that he knew and loved, and it was nothing he can do about it because he had to obey his master, which was Anakin. So it's the tragedy of what he actually had to experience, and he's chronicled all of this. So just imagine everything else that Luke has found out through R2, and that's just the amazing part, and why when we say this is real, it's real because of how it affects us, how we view everything, how it's basically grown with us throughout the years. So it's real. It may be like when other people say, you're just watching it's this hokey pokey, it was just a whole bunch of bullshit, you know it's fake. Okay, it may be, when we look at it, reality versus fiction, but the undertones are real. And that's what you need to understand.
Well, I have to say you're absolutely right. And what I find interesting is that history, might have happened, but the idea that history is written by the winners, history is malleable, it changes. And to me, anything that is historical, while you can say that it actually happened, the way we convey history to one another is through story. Yeah. We turn it into stories. We don't just, it's not like on December 28th, 1947, this happened. We don't do that. We fictionalize history, and we make it, we turn it into a narrative that becomes a story. So to me, when you're talking about history and when you're talking about fiction, there's a very thin line. I mean, it might have, but it's whoever's interpretation of history there is. I got to read this thing from this article because I love this. And you brought up the Robin Dunbar already. So this is the author of the book writing, "My colleagues and I aren't alone. In his book, Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language, the primatologist Robin Dunbar argues that human language first evolved for the purpose of telling stories, namely gossip tales about who was playing by tribal rituals and who wasn't. Dunbar and other scientists stress that gossip, although it has a bad reputation, helps a community function by policing moral infractions. If Dunbar is right, this goes a long way toward explaining humanity's ongoing and probably incurable addiction to moralistic stories that are so like gossip tales we've been sharing since our species first learned to talk. Dunbar has since studied a story's capacity to weave groups together with a biochemical thread. He's shown, for example, that when we watch emotionally arousing dramatic films, our nervous system releases the endogenous opioids known as endorphins. This is the same neurobiological mechanism known to underpin bonding in humans and other primates. So after viewing an emotionally intense drama, viewers have higher endorphin levels and report feeling a stronger sense of connection and belonging with the people around them. Hello, movie-going experience. I mean, there it is. There's a scientific analysis that basically says going to the movie theaters is better than seeing movies by yourself at home. That there's an actual physiological bonding that happens when people watch. I mean, I gotta say it, and it seems silly to say, as a middle-aged white cis male with one foot in the fucking grave. Let me just say, when Captain America has Mjolnir at the end of Endgame, I mean, there is. I say what you want. I felt the collective endorphins in that movie theater rise up. I saw it with John Campion and a bunch of LA pundits, jaded people, every single person. We were on the Disney lot talking about shills. Disney brought us to their own lot to show us Endgame. And that moment, nobody gave a fuck. Everything was about Captain America and Steve Rogers and Mjolnir and kicking Thanos' ass. And I'm telling you, it didn't matter. I don't care who you were. I don't care what your economic status was. I don't care what your sexuality, your religious preferences. Everyone in that theater at that moment, young, old, straight, gay, black, white, rich, poor, all we cared about was Steve Rogers. First of all, our first thought was, oh my God, Steve Rogers is holding Thor's hammer. And you know what? Yeah. When that moment happened, I was rifling through all the memories of my entire life up to that point, and I'm like, is there anything that's as cool as this moment right now? Have I seen anything, if I was at a basketball game when someone scored a 3-pointer at the buzzer, was that cool? Winning the NBA championship, maybe when the Seattle Supersonics did in the 78-79 season. That was downtown Freddie Brown, Slick Watch, Jack Sikma. When they won, that was pretty cool. Exactly. But it wasn't as cool as Captain America holding Mjolnir at the end of Endgame. And the entire theater, man, you could feel it. And to know that they've done studies and there's endorphin levels, there's the collective. That's why you go to the movies, man.
Yeah. But also, and I would like to get Lael's opinion and yours too, Robert. Yep. The extension of the experience continues through, like, let's say a program like this, or collecting items and posing them, or having writing a story or a fanfic about it, even speculating about what the next, if there's going to be another film. Like, it continues. The experience doesn't stop, and that's why this fandom is so popular, because we were eager to find other people who enjoyed the same things we enjoyed. Yeah. And, once we found that, thank God we found it in these communities, let's say the PGS community, or, 6 scale communities, or whatever it is, it continues. And we want that good feeling. It's a good feeling when you see something like that. And that good feeling just gets extended in activities like the Baby Yoda group that I talk about. And it's great to be able to do things like this, because this is the endorphins continue. The good feelings and the endorphins continue on.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
By the way, we got some great super chats, and I just gotta say, Lynn Hobday, who is an expat Brit living in Japan. She's a musician. She's worked in films. She's worked in anime. She sings live. She's amazing. She's one of the people I would, if I was independently wealthy, I would just jet over to Japan and take her to the Shinjuku district. I'd just make her, look, I'm here to take you out for sushi and buy Japanese die-cast. Lynn says, hi, it's Lynn again. I've been enjoying your streams with Az and Critical Drinker. I was happy to hear you used to play Ico. Okay, Ico, one of my favorite video games of all time. Ico, I mean, I like Shadow of Colossus, but there was something about Ico. I don't know if you guys ever played Ico, but Ico is one of the most zen yet mysterious, beautiful video games ever made. Play Ico. It's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. I actually wrote the lyrics for the theme tune, You Were There. Okay, this is why I love the Post-Geek Singularity. Lynn has been part of the Post-Geek Singularity almost from the beginning. And I think she worked on Godzilla Final Wars, if memory serves. I mean, she's beautiful, she's talented, she's British, and she lives in Japan, which that makes her the perfect woman in my mind. I wish if the problem is if she was here, I'd make her read all my Japanese instruction manuals, and she wouldn't like that. But so Lynn, I did not know that. Ico is an amazing game. I think it was PlayStation 2, and then they did an upgrade. I've got the upgrade. They I can't reach it. I have the PlayStation 3 upgrade with Shadow of Colossus, and it's right over there. I just can't. I'd have to go over my 1/350th scale Enterprise.
It's too far. It's too far.
It's a bridge too far, but it's good to hear from you. There's a lot of Darth Plato says Hellbound, the Korean series, which I loved. Hellbound was an interesting series. Apparently, their social conditions is why the South Koreans refer to their country as Hell Joseon, a possible connection. Could be. Could be. I'm now watching Squid Game. Darth Plato goes on. Is the Geometry Gang operating from Dr. No's island? I don't know who's behind this yet, but this is a Bond villain level stuff. Maybe Squid Game will cross over with Hellbound, and these Geometry guys will start getting decrees. Well, Darth, I have to tell you, it's no spoiler to know that you don't really know. I mean, one of the great mysteries still at the end is where did that island... The island was there, but... It's kind of like the movie Moonraker, the Bond movie Moonraker. At the end, when you find out Hugo Drax has Moonraker facilities to launch into orbit space shuttles all over the world, how did a heavy construction project like that happen in the Amazon basin? Did no one notice? You just go with it. That's all you can do. But I would be curious to hear, once you get to the end of Squid Game, what do you think? Anthony Mendoza became a member of the channel. Thank you, Anthony. Stub McShave. By the way, Stubble, I haven't watched episode 5 of Wheel of Time, but I am caught up and I have many thoughts, and I would really like to speak with you about it. Stubble says, storytelling is also an empathy machine. We get to experience things vicariously through the characters. I agree with that entirely. Even though we only experience the events indirectly, we still, at least in part, feel what they feel, or empathize with them as a friend would. I totally agree with that. All of our favorite movies, we go back to them again and again because we do empathize. Those people are our friends. I mean, Lael, how many times have you watched Star Wars in your life?
Oh my God. Oh my God. It has to be in upper thousands of times that I can't even count how many times that I've and still do it. Right now, as we speak, it's on right in the background.
Star Wars, Empire,
Star Wars, Mandalorian season 2, episode 7, The Believer is on right now. I've been running a marathon basically just through I've been trying to just chronicle everything in order. of the way I would actually see it. So I've been watching that, just to kind of get
How's
myself
Latoya
ready
feel
for
about that?
Super Bowl. She does the same thing. Actually, right now she's watching. She does. Right now she's watching Daredevil, so she's getting caught up on.
Man, you really do have the perfect woman. You know that.
Yeah, she is
Come on.
perfect, bro. She's getting
Coco
caught up
Tulip.
on Daredevil. Yeah, and I think basically more so because of when non-spoiler alert, because of the episode 3 of Hawkeye is what basically more so fueled her urge to kind of get through these seasons and really discover certain things about a particular character. But
did you ever think when you were a kid you'd find a girl like her?
Man, I'd hoped I would. Actually, you know what when I was a kid, you know what I used to tell my mom, literally, and
I do
my mom
not.
was on the show. And this is probably the first time Toy ever heard this too. And I know she's watching, but I used to tell my mother when I was little because we used to always every Saturday morning, after cartoons, after Monster Theater, we would watch Kung Fu Theater, and I used to always tell my mom, I'm gonna marry a Japanese woman. When I was little. This is what I used to tell my mother when I was young. I'm going to marry a Japanese woman. So that was basically one of the things. This is when I was I'm young. Of course, that's changed. But everything I embodied embodied in, what I wanted out of a woman, someone who was sensible, we can have good conversation, but was also, she had that geeky quality and was very, very much interested in what I was interested in. Yeah, like seriously, that's just the way she is. So she is the perfect symbiote to me.
Wow.
Yeah, but yes, what like was said in the movie not Loving Basketball, but what was it called? Brown Sugar, when he said to the character, you are the perfect melody to a tight beat. That's what he said.
Oh,
So
that's a great line.
yeah, like straight up, that was like the dopest line, and that's just basically the way she is. But yeah, I mean, Star Wars to me, bro, like there's not 1 week, literally, and you can ask her, not 1 week, 1 day that goes by that Star Wars isn't on my television, and it almost becomes addictive, but it's not, because it, again, like certain things that we carry with us, it's nostalgia. It's nostalgic, but also it's something that bonds itself to our spirit, because it's that, like what said tonight, it's the realism and connective tissue that we find in storytelling.
True. I gotta say, this is to RTNZ sends in a super chat and says, "Hail, Bob, Lael, and thanks, I thought I was the only person who wanted to see the Celestial emerge. I was gutted for Icarus, trapped between his creator and his love for Cersei.
Yes.
The writer says he's dead."
Yeah,
but he can be rebuilt. Okay, but gotta give it to you. I'm with you. I thought that was what I don't understand why people didn't find that conflict interesting. Like, Eternals I don't think is being given enough credit in fan communities for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it has a lot of elements to it, and they fit a lot in a film that had a lot more detail. Let's say if you could fit more, it would have made a good TV series as well. And maybe they'll still do that, but there are a lot of things that I think made it less appealing solely just by the advertising of it alone. And so had they not made those errors, I think, in it, even with 1.44 million impressions or 144 million impressions, had those errors not been made, we'd have a completely different conversation about the film right now.
Yeah, I agree. I loved it. I still love it, but yeah.
I mean,
now,
even when I think about the gentleman who plays who becomes, let's say, a Bollywood star, even his role, we're not aware of it in the trailers at all, really, which is fine.
No.
It's okay. But for one of the persons who's maybe one of the most charismatic characters in the movie, maybe he should have been more of a focus in the trailer. I don't know. I mean, I think about that sometimes.
Well, I got something I got to ask you about storytelling. So, I find you, because, you're an enigma. Both of you. You know, I don't know you. I've never met either one of you in real life. I've only met you virtually. So I love learning more about you. Is the only way we learn about each other is we stream, and I'm like, okay.
You have formed Voltron, Rob. You have found the pieces of the puzzle to form Voltron.
Well, but I got it. One of the things I love about that I did not know is she is a Titanic. What would you call it? I don't want to say freak, fan, aficionado.
I'm a super fan.
Okay, you're a super fan of the Titanic. Now, here's the thing.
Yes, and have been since 1985 when Robert Ballard and the French government co-discovered Titanic in the ocean.
Okay, and I found that just endeared you to me more when I found out you were a Titanic fan, because now let me ask you, you know, the whole the Titanic story. I mean, we all know it now because of Cameron's film, but even before that, what I always found fascinating, and the Titanic was fascinating to me because, to me, it was like, at the time, I thought of it as the Starship Enterprise. It was like the ultimate starship. It was the ultimate seafaring vessel. It was the culmination of all of our technology to create the grandest ship ever built. And the narrative is that this is unsinkable. The whole unsinkable Molly Brown was on the Titanic. That all of that, and yet felled by nature. You know, this incredible, the hubris of man. We have created this thing that is the grandest, most indestructible thing ever. And then, of course, the tragedy of what happened.
Yeah.
And so, to me, the story of Titanic, and I'm talking pre-James Cameron, I'm talking about the actual story of the Titanic, not Jack and Rose, which, by the way, I'm a huge Titanic. I love Titanic. I love that movie. I love it. I love the whole first. But when the ship sinks, it's great. But I do love the first hour and a half, the whole story of Jack and Rose and meeting, and even I know you're a melancholy. I don't presume to know why. I love that movie. But when the idea of the hubris of man being felled, you know, we're still right to the bottom of the ocean, is always a great story. That's classic storytelling. That's like the gods themselves were there.
Yeah.
If it wasn't an iceberg, it would have been Zeus. If you told the story in ancient Greece or whatever, or ancient Rome, you know what I mean? So why? What was it that made you a fan of this story? When did you become an acolyte?
I've always been a fan of naval wrecks and archaeology and things of that nature. So, you know, when you both remember in the 80s when they had first discovered the wreck of the Titanic, I think it was on PBS. It was a big deal. Like it was
a big deal.
And, you know, it was exciting to see this. And
so do you like to sing the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald? Is that like one of your favorite songs of all time?
It is not, but I understand, like, you know, that was another one where they found it, and you know, I think they put a plaque down on it and everything. But there is something to be said for this mystery about it. And there was this book that it was called The Titan, I think, by Morgan Robertson. I think that's the author's name, and he kind of predicted the wreck of the Titanic. And, you know, so there was a lot of mystery and kind of folklore associated with the Titanic disaster. And there have been research papers published about it, about how the way that people, you know, when they're told about a disaster, how do people respond to natural disasters? And, you know, if you're told that you're on a sinking ship, you know, what's your response? You know, first of all, they weren't told they were on a sinking ship, but let's just say for all practical purposes, if someone told you the ship was sinking, what would your first move be? And so they talked about, you know, how passengers were restricted from moving in certain places, and how society at that time was so different from what we know it today, where the classes were separated in such a fashion that, you know, let's say certain classes wouldn't dare approach the other ones. And so technically speaking, the movie Titanic is, you know, wholeheartedly unrealistic that Jack would ever even talk to Rose, because, you know, he's not in the same, you know, class there. But
They did a good job of portraying that, though.
He does do a good job of it, and so while it may not be historically, it's not verisimilitude, but for entertainment value, we're that particular version. While James Cameron went out of his way to give it as much verisimilitude as possible, he still needed a story.
Yeah.
So he had to take a creative license and go ahead and create that bond between the two of them, which ends in tragedy, of course. But I think that, to be honest with you, this was one of the first versions of the film that it made it seem like it was an action adventure. So we hadn't gotten that before. A lot of the other Titanic versions were somewhat somber and very dour in their portrayal. And this one had a different feel to it. And I think that that's why it appealed to so many people, even though it is essentially one of the worst, nautical disasters. So that was something else about it that was very interesting. Belfast in Ireland, where they built the Titanic, has a huge museum to the Titanic, and there's one or two museums in the United States that also have replicas of the ship, or parts of the ship are replicated. But I've always been a fan of it, and it's I've just always been a fan of the Titanic ever since they discovered it. So I hope that answers your question, Robert.
It does. No, it absolutely does, and I totally understand. It's just fascinating to me.
I love the explanation.
Yeah, I do too.
Lael, thank you.
Very fascinating to me. I mean, the thing is, again, really what I was going to get to was it's a story. The story of the Titanic is a very compelling story on many different levels. And I think the reason that I'm so interested in storytelling in all of its myriad permutations is because of how stories are how we define ourselves and the world around us. We couch it in narrative. And I think that a lot of people just take storytelling for granted. They don't realize that, like, if somebody wasn't there, when you go to your significant other or a parent and you have to explain what happened to you that day, you tell the story. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, when you're telling a story to your mom and dad, you want to tell that story to make, yourself look like, no, it wasn't my fault. A narrative can be changed, and it matters. And I think that I've considered myself a student of storytelling. Yeah. And how storytelling works, and what are the mechanics of storytelling. And every human being has that's why I say on my channel, has a story to tell. And all you have to do is listen. And I've learned more from listening to people. You wouldn't know that on this channel because I talk all the time, but hey, shut the fuck up, dude. But yeah, I know, right? We're on YouTube. But the thing is, I do think that narrative, I'm fascinated by narrative. And I'm fascinated by how narrative works, because it is the way that we define us. At the end of the day, one day our sun will burn out, and the only thing that will be left of humanity will be a story, or stories, or many stories, or hundreds of millions or billions of stories, I would hope. But that's all that will remain.
Lael, you've seen Squid Game, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking is because, as you know, Robert's doing a review of Squid Game with Az, and yesterday or whatever day it was, Robert, one of the viewers had commented that Squid Game was inspired from an actual event that took place. And can you elaborate on that? Do you recall the?
Yeah, no, it was an actual, and I didn't know this, so it was an actual uprising where that workers were on strike at an auto manufacturing plant, and what happened was the government, the troops came in, the police came in, and the strikers, it was okay to commit acts of violence against them. Like this was considered almost like an insurrection against the order. So the police, the government, the strikers were violently put down. And not only were they put down, but they were then blacklisted. So the industry made sure that these workers couldn't get more work.
Have a voice, yeah.
So, and this is in South Korea. I mean, and I've been to South Korea, and I mean, I was there for 12 days working on a documentary, and I was there when the Olympics were on. And I have to say, I loved South Korea. And we were there doing some historical work, and I got to see, like, the first VCR that was ever made. Samsung made it, and it's in a museum. And I didn't really understand the military history of... I didn't really get the Korean War. I didn't really understand that the communists went over the line. It was a sneak attack against Seoul. It was a sneak invasion, you know, and it happened in 3 days. And they had taken... I mean, it's fascinating. And I was there because John Singlob, who is one of the founders of the CIA, I was doing a documentary on him, and he's revered in South Korea because of the work that he did there during the Korean War. And it was an amazing place. And what I found really interesting about South Korea that I didn't expect is that everywhere we went, when we told people that we were there for a documentary and we were talking about the Korean War, every South Korean that I talked to, everyone. Now, keep in mind, there was a lot of language differences, but all of them believed that Korea would once again be unified. All of them were like, you know what? One day Korea is going to be one Korea. North Korea will, like the Berlin Wall coming down. And all of them were excited about it. It was almost like, you know, in a way, it felt like a religion. Like the people of South Korea, they can't wait until the wall comes down, the demilitarized zone is discombobulated, and Korea is unified again. And there was something strangely uplifting about that. Like, I don't have a dog in that hunt. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, until you go someplace, Korea was where MASH took place, you know, and where Samsung Electronics come from, and a lot of movies I've loved for the last 20 years are from. And let's face it, my beloved Blackpink is from South Korea as well, except Lalisa. But it was really interesting, and again, it's narrative, it's storytelling, and so, you know, watching a lot of the great stuff, whether it's The Host, or whether it's Memories of Murder, or whether it's Snowpiercer, or whether it's Parasite. South Korea has an incredibly vibrant storytelling industry that's really got a lot to say. And I find what's coming out of South Korea fascinating. And I love their narrative. So Squid Game, when I heard that story, and you know what, it was actually Alexander Wilson, now that I think about it, who is a longtime imagination connoisseur from the Washington, D.C. area, who brought that up.
Yes. Yes, and it was very interesting, you know, the idea that the workers who took part in this were then not able to get positions anywhere else.
Blacklisted entirely.
And this was something that I thought would be, you know, and you and As had already discussed it about how that would affect some of the members in the Squid Game, since they also may have had a similar situation where they just couldn't get work anymore.
Yeah, 456. I didn't know that. I mean, I just thought he was like a schlep rock who fell on hard times and couldn't I didn't realize that by learning that he was in that uprising, he couldn't get work.
Yeah.
Like he was actually, so it kind of, in a way, that knowledge that Alexander gave us changed my opinion of the show.
Yeah.
Changed visually how like you view it, how you see it in the narrative.
Yeah, because right? I looked at 456, our hero. I saw him as kind of a loser, you know, because the way he's presented, he's borrowing money from his ex-wife, and he's not a good father. And when he does get money, he gambles it away, and he is a limo driver. I didn't realize that the uprising, the strike that he was in. And Korea, people who lived in Korean nationals would know this, that he probably was blacklisted and couldn't get a job, which changed my opinion about him, because I was like, look, he was obviously a noble character, but in the first couple episodes, he's kind of a douche, and I didn't like him. I'm like, dude, but knowing that he was somebody who wanted to work, participated in the strike, and that the government and the owners violently suppressed this strike and then took retribution out on all the workers who all they wanted was fair wages and a good day's work. To know that, I was more sympathetic.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that when I was watching the show, because how would I? How would anybody? It still works if you don't know.
And learning about it was very interesting. And it's, we had, or I think we've talked about it here on this show, about how the person who made the script, it took 8 years to get it to actual production. And so, you just never know with these stories, the inspiration and the struggle just to even get it to this point and look at the success that it's been. But Robert, you mentioned something about wanting to tell us what had happened to you. And as we're continuing the story about breaking down the tropes that we know. About
I you know what? I'm like, I need some popcorn for this. Well, okay. I mean, here's the thing. Yes, I mean, I talked about perhaps I should have some. I love white cheddar popcorn.
Yeah.
So so here's the thing. Storytelling, narratives, it permeates every facet of our culture. And narratives and storytelling plays a big part in our current political discourse. And I think people are easily manipulated by good storytellers. A good storyteller can sway you many different ways. And I also think that we as people are predisposed to believe in good narratives, especially if they fit our worldview. So one of the things that I've been, and here's the thing, I'm going to mention all this stuff, and I don't want it to necessarily be political, even though I don't think you can talk about it. I'm not talking about this politically right now. But I think we've all heard of Q and QAnon and all the different conspiracy theories and all of that. Well, over Thanksgiving dinner, I wound up in a conversation with somebody who's very talented that I respect, and started talking to me about adrenochrome. Now, I don't know if anyone knows what adrenochrome is. But in reality, adrenochrome, here's what adrenochrome is, according to Wikipedia. Adrenochrome is a chemical compound produced by the oxidation of adrenaline, epinephrine. It was the subject of limited research from the 50s to the 70s as a potential cause for schizophrenia. While it has no current medical application, the related derivative compound, carbazochrome, is a hemostatic medication. Despite the compound's name, it is unrelated to the element chromium. Instead, the chrome suffix indicates a relationship to color, as pure adrenochrome is deep violet. So there you go, right? Well, for anyone who's familiar with adrenochrome as it's been used by the QAnon believers, it's a very different thing. And I found myself in a conversation about Tom Cruise and Eyes Wide Shut and Pizzagate and all of the different political conspiracy theories that you've heard in the last 4 or 5 years, QAnon and the Pizzagate stuff. And I'm listening to this, and it all comes down to this idea of adrenochrome. And because I work in the Hollywood film industry, this person was like, come on, you know what it's all about. And of course, if you look up adrenochrome now adrenochrome is something that the Democrat pedophile Satan worshipers are doing to children, torturing them so they can turn their blood, they can adrenochrome out their blood and drink it to live forever or whatever. I mean, there's so much crazy stuff. And I'm listening to this.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, Adrenochrome is actually name-checked in one of my favorite films of all time, A Clockwork Orange. The Sisters of Mercy, who's one of my favorite bands from Britain, has a song from 1980 called Adrenochrome. So adrenochrome, this idea of adrenochrome, has been around in pop culture for a long time. Mm-hmm. Now, because it has to do with blood and all this stuff, and it was co-opted by Q, who, the QAnon guys or whoever it is, was amazing to create this, to make people believe, again, in a narrative. And I'm fascinated by conspiracy theories and flat earthers and all that, because they're just telling stories to each other that they believe. Yeah. And they're predisposed because of their personalities to believe in these things, whether they seem rational or not. So, here's an article from the Daily Beast. How QAnon became obsessed with adrenochrome, an imaginary drug Hollywood is harvesting from kids. Now, I would never have believed anyone would have believed this, but I had an experience, Thanksgiving dinner, where someone did. And they
believe this.
They absolutely believed it. Okay. And they were talking to me as if because I live in Hollywood and because I know people, that I must know this is going on. It was more like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're part of the crowd.
Yeah.
So this was written in 2020, August 14th, by Tarpley Hitt, who's a reporter. In recent months, the YouTube comments for a song by the 1980s British post-punk band, the Sisters of Mercy, which I love, have veered slightly off topic. The favorite song of rich and depraved elites, wrote user AlienDude30. I like this song, Hillary Clinton offered ADA January. A Dean Latimer added, Q is chasing the goths. The track, which first appeared on a 7-inch in 1982, isn't one of the Leeds area band's better-known songs. Actually, it's a pretty good song. It's an abrasive, theatrically dark tune with an early drum machine percussion and low, campy vocals. The lyrics are typical goth stuff, as is the Black Album artwork, which features the band's logo, a medical scalp illustration overlaid on a pentacle. But it's the title the commenters were drawn to, Adrenochrome. Adrenochrome is an easy-to-come-by chemical compound, usually found as a light pink solution that forms by the oxidation of adrenaline, the stress hormone. It's not approved for medical use by the Food and Drug Administration, though researchers can buy it. The compound has become an object of fascination, however, among COVID-19 truthers and adherents of QAnon, the fringe, baseless theory that a well-sourced government agent called Q leaks top-secret intel about a global cabal of Democratic and Hollywood pedophiles through cryptic and grandiose messages known as Q-drops. The quasi-cult sway has grown considerably in recent years, thanks in part to the tacit encouragement of Donald Trump. On Tuesday, a QAnon promoter named Marjorie Taylor Greene won 57% of the vote in the Republican primary for Georgia's 14th congressional district, all but ensuring her victory. Spoiler alert, she won. There's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take this global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles out. And I think we have the president to do it, Greene once said in a video from 2017. And Donald Trump applauded Greene's primary victory. Now, here's the thing. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take this global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles out. That's a story. That's a narrative. Mm-hmm. She's spinning a narrative, and what she's done is it's the hero narrative, and we're all part of it. If you believe in this, you can take up arms against the evil pedophile, Democrat, demon, blood-worshipping. I mean, It's amazing. And this narrative, it's a narrative. And I find it fascinating. And at Thanksgiving, I had this conversation. And what was amazing to me was the person I was talking to, who's a very talented individual, smart guy, believed it utterly. And he believed this narrative. And I was like, it's not even a very good narrative. I could punch holes in it. But if you want to believe, like Fox Mulder in The X-Files, I mean, Adrenochrome, all a cursory Google glance. I mean, you can find what you want, I guess. But the thing about great storytelling is it holds up to scrutiny. Like if you question it. Star Wars, The Hero's Journey, it holds up. You know, Last Jedi, not so much. But great stories hold up to scrutiny. If you want to examine them and poke holes in them, the great stories will survive. They will hold up to scrutiny. And yet, nowadays, a lot of us want to believe in narratives that we will die on the narrative hill. Like we will protect the sanctity of these crazy narratives, even though they're outlandish and probably not true. And it's a very odd place to be, because I always thought the great stories are about truth. The great stories get to convey to each other. It's hard to talk about human existence to anyone who's not an intimate of ours. You can't just go out and tell your friends about, well, let me tell you about everything I ever thought about the human existence. People are like, come on, man, let's have another pint. But you put it in a story, people will listen. People will go into auditoriums, hundreds of people at the same time, sit next to total strangers and listen to what you have to say. That's the power of storytelling. And I think that nowadays, you know, there's a lot of disaffected people that are questioning and worried, and they're looking for meaning in their lives, and stories are being used against them. People are weaving narratives that are untrue. But for a population that is desperate for heroes and hero stories. And I wonder, how are we going to change this? How are we going to bring people? I'm listening to these crazy conspiracy theories, which ultimately always end with the rapture, the end of the world, and the few of us that believe will be saved. And even that's a story. It's just a story that hasn't happened yet.
Also, I think that, like, in some of these cases, for people, or let's say for individuals who choose to believe those stories, they're looking for an explanation to give the reasons why they have these disappointments.
Yeah.
And so something like this story fills that niche in what they're searching for. And it's unfortunate because a lot of times they're not initially conspiracy theorists. They're just looking at the news and they came across it. And, you know, they interpret that as an adequate explanation as to what's going on. And I think that if you were kind of look at it from the point of view of someone who's desperate for a reason, and they latch on to anything that they can find that might provide that, that's when something like this can really kind of take off and gain popularity. And normally they would never even be looking for that. But, you know, at a vulnerable moment, as with any kind of cult style group, that one is like, it intertwines itself into a society. And I've even heard stories, Robert, of, you know, families getting together, and this entire theory is kind of like rip them apart. It's gone beyond the idea of what it was originally intended to be. It's now become something that can divide individuals even within families. And they had a 60 Minutes program about it, but that particular organization tends to break down the tropes that we're comfortable with.
But why do you? Oh, go ahead.
Yes,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. What I think is interesting is that it's being used as an explanation as to why something has happened, but it in itself breaks down tropes even further.
What I find interesting is that, you know, I think in our world, it's very hard to find meaning in one's own life. You know, we do it. We hopefully we find a spouse, we create a family unit, we have children, and then we can live vicariously through them. And children are our legacy and all that. But it's becoming increasingly more difficult to do that in an age where those roles aren't so clearly defined. You know, in the modern age, people are getting married later. A lot of them aren't having children. So the traditional family unit that basically evolved when we started coming down from the trees, we had to divide up. I mean, to continue on, women had to bear children, so they lived in the caves and took care of the kids, while the men were out throwing spears at mammoths. You know, we had to eat. And the division of labor was where we were for the majority of human history. I mean, it's only been in the last couple of 100 years that it's so funny. We're always talking about, well, we have to talk about equality and equity and that, which is great. But those are luxuries. We've now built a society where we can even talk about equality because we're not running away from the predators that wanted to eat us. You know, I mean, things have changed, which is good. But we can't forget where we've been and where we're going. And storytelling is the only thing that preserves our history, and it also preserves our present because it makes sense. We're always telling stories about what happened to us today because we're trying to make sense of the world we live in. And the only way to do that is we all understand narrative. Like, yeah, man, I got up today and I was feeling depressed because something happened. We're all like, yeah, I get you. I totally understand. I felt that way 2 weeks ago. So we all understand. We're all on the same. That's what storytelling does. It puts us all on the same plane of understanding. Like, oh, I get it. I totally get. I was right there with you. And once the stage has been set and we all know we live in this world, then you tell the story, and the truth of it is what's important. Like, that's you're exactly right, man.
Yeah.
And I want to ask Lael this question, and I'm sure Lael will concur with me. And similar to what Robert has just described to both of us, Lael, where you know, it's not Thanksgiving, but a family holiday where you're kind of expecting to relive some other family holidays. Do you remember last year when we had that great time? And then there may be someone who introduced a trope where that storytelling, you know, what would have been a normal storytelling experience about what a great time you had last year, or whatever the recall was, then someone may introduce a trope and it breaks that down. And even though it may be true that the trope was something that occurred, you know, you think to yourself, gee, you know, let's discuss it another time because we want to hear the regular tropes we're accustomed to on a holiday time. Right, Lael?
Yeah. I think, you know what, and it's crazy because that is what recently happened. You know what I mean? Just getting together on a holiday. You know, if it's one of those days where we're so used to, we all have what we call family traditions around the holiday season. You know, you basically get together, you eat food, you might play games, but then you actually reminisce on, you know, childhood, exposés, you know, things that actually might have happened between family, movies that you've seen. You know, we always, you know, relive those things. But then I find that this year was different. And it was different in a way that we have just come past, or we've just come out of a pandemic. And the conversations aren't as vibrant as they used to be because now the pandemic is shaped. It's okay. So we went through a pandemic that has also divided us in a sense, and divided our beliefs. And the thing is, it's like for now, like for one of the biggest things right now is, you know, I have some family members who have gone unvaccinated. You know, some family members who are vaccinated. And because of that, they look at the ones who are vaccinated like, you fell for that. Like, or, yo, do you understand what it is that you're into? Like, did you really do the research before you did it? And then you have the other side of the family who's trying to convince the other side that this is why you should do it. why it's something that is important, because not only are you protecting yourselves, but you're protecting individuals around you. And then that basically became, and then I'm sitting there like, what happened to the old conversations and the stories that we had of, like, that my father told his father before him told, and how it's been passed down to generations. Like, I want to get back to that, but yet they've used this time to talk about things that have really divided and conquered, and it just brings it down to the point where you're just like, man, who else's house can I go to get some food and have a nice conversation? Like, you know what I mean? Like, literally, like, that's what Thanksgiving is for. Like, you just go around to different people's houses and stuff like that. But it's like, you know what? Maybe I should find somebody who I don't know and just say I'm a family member and just sit down and eat. And
but I have to say, Lael, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, you've nailed the problem with not just Thanksgiving, with America as a whole.
Yeah.
We used to believe, Americans used to believe in the idea of America, which was also a story.
Yeah.
Whether it's the national anthem or whatever. And we all, despite our differences, we all still believed in America.
Yeah.
And look, I would ask you this. I mean, in the black community, and I've noticed, forgive me if I'm wrong, you would consider yourself black, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Just want to check. Because,
Black and Hispanic.
Black is okay.
Yeah.
But, in the black community, there's a reason to have a strong distrust of vaccinations. I mean, it goes back to, whether it's the Tuskegee experiments. It's not like America has done right by our black brothers and sisters throughout history. So within the community, there is a reason to have a healthy distrust of vaccinations.
Yeah.
And by the way, you can't fault that. I mean, it can be something that might be frustrating, but I mean, they were stories that were suppressed, but they saw the light of day, and they were true stories, and they were monstrous and horrific, and part of a long line of horrible things that happened to the black community in the United States. So, in my mind, it's funny. I watch NFL players get disciplined, because of their anti-vax status. And look, I get it. I mean, I do a medical lecture series that I direct with an ER doctor who the fact is, all of these vaccines, if you look at how the efficacy, they weren't supposed to be approved till 2023. None of them. They were all experimental. And then when they circumvent the actual processes that we've set up to make sure that these vaccines are safe. And when our government said, you know what? Nope, we need them right now. It's like, but what you're doing is you're creating distrust amongst people, because the very systems you set up to make sure things like vaccines were safe, you're like, fuck it, we're not going to do it here. And what are people supposed to believe? It's like they're undermining their own stories. And when people disbelieve, you can't blame them.
Yeah. And that's, what, here's the biggest thing, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that has been a topic. And for me, to be quite honest and to be real, even before I got vaccinated, like I said, I've had the first two, I've got the booster shot, so I'm fully vaccinated. And I did it specifically for a reason. Because I was one of them that was really skeptical in the very beginning. I was, but at the same time, me, I want to basically say that I'm like, somewhat of an historian, even though I don't have a degree in it. I mean, I've just basically studied. But I look at it this way: you're looking at a time when, us, even like us as, African Americans, me myself as an Afro-Cuban American. You know what I mean? Like, I look at basically that portion of it, but I'm looking at history. I'm looking at back then how there was the experiments that took place back then, they were forced upon. You know what I mean? It wasn't one of those things where you can say no. You didn't have a choice. There was no damn choice. And the thing is, even if you'd had a choice, you weren't told what it was. You were told it was something else. It was disguised. You know what I mean? And something that during those experiments really broke down. It really, really, and it was a process, not only a process of elimination, but it was a process of population control amongst the African American community.
Yep.
And that's what it was. They can basically say it wasn't, but that's exactly what it was. Now, the thing is, that's where it built up like distrust and skepticism, in the government and the treatment, basically amongst a culture.
And rightfully so.
And rightfully so, because it's something that really hasn't, they're still right now, even to this day. Yes, you can say I'm sorry, but how far does that sorry go? Because there's families that have been torn apart because of this. Now, with that basically being said, I had to look at it, knowing the history. I had to say to myself, okay, now I have a choice. I have a right. I have a choice. But at the same time, my choice to whether or not I get this vaccine or I don't is now affecting everyone that I love, everyone that I'm around. So I have a choice, but I have to also decide whether or not my choice is going to affect my children, my mother, and everything. And when I say mother, that was the deciding factor, because my mom, at the age that she is right now, went and got vaccinated. She went and got it done, even though my mother will never, unless she has to, she's retired, a retired nurse, she will never leave the house. She's comfortable in her home. She watches her TV. She has everything. My mother right now is living a spoiled life. Literally, she gets everything she wants. I asked her, Mom, what did you want for Christmas this year? Last year, I remember I got her a couple of things. This year, she's like, I want Beats headphones. I want Beat headphones for my like literally, I swear, she wants Beats headphones. So I basically today got my mother some Beats headphones, noise cancellation headphones for Christmas. Because
well, now she's gonna know you just ruined the surprise, dude.
She you know.
That's good.
But bro, anyway, she got the vaccine. She was vaccinated. She got both shots, and she got the booster. And she's at home, living comfortably, and she's cool. And that to me was like, if she can do it, why can't I? And that was one of the things, because I had to look at it that way, because my mother she's lived during those time periods, and her mother and her father have lived during those periods where there wasn't a choice given. And now she has a choice. She used her choice, and she did it because she decided that it was something that she wanted to do. Now, here's the thing. For those who haven't really gotten vaccinated, I'm not here to tell you that you have to do it. And I'm not telling you, because it's a choice. It is your choice to basically do it, just like it was my choice to get it. You know what I mean? If you don't want to get it, that's fine. But I chose to do it because, like I said, I did it for reasons that I'm not being selfless. I'm not being selfish. I'm actually looking at the people that I'm around and like, look, I'm affecting these individuals' lives. I'm affecting my neighbor. If I go out, even if I wear a mask, I'm still affecting individuals with my presence. So I have to make sure that I'm protected by any means. And on top of that, I have children, and I'm around young children, and I have to make sure that I'm leading. It's sort of like leading by example, but I also preach choice. You have a choice. I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm only telling you what makes me safe, and the reason why I did it, so you could be safe. And I think but the thing is, we live in a society now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, like, it is almost damn near martial law. Like, literally, it is. It is almost damn near martial law that wherever you go, they have a right to say, you're not allowed in here unless you've been vaccinated.
Now, what's interesting about this is, and getting back to, let's say, the article in question about how having stories that we know as a regular trope, and then having other stories that break it down, or circumstances like what you and Lael just mentioned, is that let's say I joined you for that day and I didn't know anybody there. Even I, as the observer, can recognize when the trope has been broken. And I think that that's very interesting, because what it says is that you didn't have to be there, all those years. You could just step right in. And as a person listening to a story, you can tell right away when a trope is being broken. And, I think that's also something that I think a lot of fans in the fandom, when they see a story and they see a trope is broken, they don't want to necessarily hear, well, the writers intended this and all this sort of stuff. They know when something is not quite right. in a storyline, and I think that they know right away. It's almost instinctive. But Robert, I did want to say that there are quite a few Stream Elements super chats as well as regular super chats, according to the mods. They keep telling me.
Yeah, I know we've got more. I have not gotten through all of them. Not nearly all of them. Anthony Mendoza says, "Good morning, everyone. I'm wondering if any of you have seen DBZ Light of Hope on YouTube. I highly recommend it. It's the best live adaptation of DBZ." I don't know what DBZ is. When someone says that, hang on. Let me check. What is DBZ? Oh my God. See?
Dragon Ball Z?
Yes. Jesus Christ. See, here's the thing. Not being ensconced in Dragon Ball Z fandom, when someone says DBZ, I should know that. By the way, can I just say, Anthony, I'm embarrassed. Color me embarrassed. DBZ, of course. I'm thinking Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, I don't know. Yes, okay. I have seen Dragon Ball Z episodes, and I think it's quite good. I've just never been immersed in it. Yeah. So I have not seen Light of Hope on YouTube. It's the best, I would say, live action adaptation. Well, I'll go check that out because, Dragon Ball Z is a very, very lovely anime. It's a lot of fun. I think it's a great story. It's really good. I just, it was one of those things where I could never get into it. I was a little too old.
It's incredibly popular.
It's great. I mean, there's a reason why, because it is really good. It is really good. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, "Hey, Rob, it's been a while. I lurk a lot, but I haven't been able to correlate my thoughts. How do you feel?" Oh, this is a good question. "How do you feel about Russell T. Davies returning to Doctor Who? I really think he is Doctor Who's only hope." Well, for those of you who don't know, Russell T. Davies was an early writer on the reboot of Doctor Who since 2005 and did a great job. Now, I love Russell T. Davies, not just because of Doctor Who, but because he wrote the third season of Torchwood, the 5-episode Torchwood Children of Earth, which is one of the greatest 5 hours of science fiction television I've ever seen. And I had never seen Torchwood. I had seen Captain Jack and Doctor Who, but I had not seen Torchwood. And my God, Russell T. Davies, they knocked that shit out of the park. I had the Blu-ray. I started watching Children of Earth at 1 a.m. I stayed up. I watched all 5 hours. It was that good, and I went to work late. I paid the piper. I paid the price. But my God. So is Russell T. Davies Doctor Who's last hope? I don't know. I feel that since he left, we've had years of mediocrity. So maybe he's got a reason to restore it. So I hope it's good. I mean, I think that would be good. 200 Watt Studio sends in a super chat and says, "Hey guys, good to see you all. What happened to storytelling? It seems that the current batch of writers have no life experience to draw on. Star Trek, Discovery. Well, I think that's part of it. I mean, look, I think so much of the writing in today's media is written by people who only saw media growing up. And all great storytelling comes from literary sources. If you are not well versed in the classics, then you really shouldn't be writing modern TV because your work is just derivative over or from other TV shows. It's all cannibalized. That's just me. What do you guys think?
Or if you don't understand the tropes in this article that we're talking about, right, Lael? Where if they don't even understand why some of these Jane Austen stories are so popular, because you have these scenarios, like, for example, in Pride and Prejudice, which is one of my favorites. You can spend the entire time after reading it trying to figure out which characters are prideful and which ones are prejudiced, and in actuality, it's all of them.
Yeah.
So it creates this story that's very appealing to a lot of people because nobody's perfect. Yeah. we can see a lot of the behavior of the characters in all of us, and that's what people sometimes like to see in these scenarios. Jane Austen had a fantastic way of showing her, as the article professes, a protagonist that possibly needs improvement. They're not perfect, but you still feel pretty good when the antagonist, like for example in Persuasion, when the antagonist, who has run up millions of dollars of debt, I guess very similar to the Squid Game situation, tries to marry his cousin, who if he marries her, he will inherit a ton of wealth. And of course, once his plan is thwarted and he's going to end up in some debtor's prison, it's very satisfying to know that he wasn't able to go through with his evil plan. So it's interesting looking at it from that way.
I agree. Now, this is a good one. Great answer, by the way. RRTNZ says, once again, hail from New Zealand. Hi. Thinking of master storytellers, who do you all prefer, Alan Moore or Neil Gaiman? Which one and why? I'm like, oh boy. Lael, do you have an answer for that one?
I'm leaning more towards Neil Gaiman. Just for specific reasons, because the kid. You know what? I refuse to answer.
You can't refuse.
I would say Neil Gaiman. For me, it's Neil Gaiman. Because of the way the story, because sometimes the way he bounces between certain narratives in his story and how the thing is, Neil Gaiman's writing is real crazy, because the way he writes, it's like you think that he can agree and disagree with you. You know what I mean? Like, he forces you to see things through the eyes of that character, but then also forces you to basically see why people look at this person like, what are you doing? Like, what are you? And that's the most important. Like, when you can go on a trip believing that this character is the character that you're following is right, but then you have to also understand why others around, like the supporting cast around this character, may look at that person like, no, you're not, and why they may have, like, literally, like, he forces you to, and it's like, it's I think it's just brilliant storytelling, but both are good, but I just lean towards.
Okay, I have an answer for this.
Yeah.
My favorite comic book series of all time is The Sandman.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Yes. And I've been reading, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot of backlash where people are like, well, I went back and revisited The Sandman, and it's not as good as I remember it when I was 30 years younger. Mm-hmm. I read something today like, well, I've been watching a lot of the original Star Trek series, and it's just garbage. It's terrible. It's a product of its time. It's not very good. Both of those things, history has already judged them. Whether we think they're good or not, history has judged them. We already know that they are. Whether you choose to like them or not, or don't see why people like them and why they've endured, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I would look, I love Alan Moore's writing. Mm-hmm. I love it. But Alan Moore is the intellectual. Alan Moore is the guy that appeals to your if you're getting your PhD in college, all of the PhD students are going to love Alan Moore, like Watchmen, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, all that stuff. From Hell, all that. Now Neil Gaiman,
I do like him.
I love them both. I mean, I have so much of their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Neil Gaiman is all about heart and emotion.
Yeah.
And it's not to say he's not an intellectual, because he is, but Alan Moore's stories are derived from intellect, and Neil Gaiman's stories come from the heart. Mm-hmm. And they're all about emotion, and I like them both. Yeah. And it's really interesting because we actually have a graphic example in the Miracle Man. If you collected Miracle Man, it was written first by Alan Moore, and he wrote, I believe, 16 issues, and then it was canceled, or he stopped writing it. And who picked up the mantle? Neil Gaiman. Yep. So if you want if you want a lesson in the two of them as storytellers, get that entire run of Miracle Man, because you get to go from. And by the way, Alan Moore wrote Miracle Man 15, which has one of the greatest superhero battles of all time in it. You know, when the villain is cutting people's heads off in London and sticking them on pikes, trying to entice Miracle Man into a fight, and it works. It's pretty damn good. So
Yes, indeed.
So thank you for that, RRTNZ.
That was a good question. That was definitely a good question.
Good. Well,
I was going to say, for me, it's going to be. I do like Neil Gaiman as well, but it's Alan Moore, because The Watchmen and From Hell are two of my favorite. I guess graphic novels.
Oh, great.
So I think that they just definitely and The Watchmen, the adaptation, even the movie, I felt that was just something that was groundbreaking and fun. It was a fun twist to what we see, and From Hell was a fun twist of anything with Jack the Ripper. I'm a big fan of, so I really liked it, and I did like a lot of the other stories as well.
Speaking of which, I'm glad you said that, Watchmen, because Rob, a So toy figure that I actually had, I helped Justin name, has been released. It is called Punchline, and it is the comedian.
Wait, really?
The comedian,
is
the
out?
Comedian, it's not out, but the reveal was.
Oh, because I have the Hot Toys comedian.
Yeah, they released so toys just released it, and then Justin asked me about it. I gave it the name Punchline.
Punchline's great.
Yeah, and they gave it the name. Yeah. It's out.
Wow, I mean, I didn't know they were doing that. Did they actually put because Hot Toys, this is so weird, they couldn't get the rights. The smiley face is trademarked.
Yeah.
And when they put out the figure, it's just a blank yellow circle.
Yeah.
You have to draw it on there. But wow, but why the comedian? I want Night Owl, man. I want Night Owl and Dr. Manhattan, so I could have the. But I'm gonna buy it anyway.
Did they do Rorschach? They did, right?
It hasn't come out yet.
Yeah, they did it, but it hasn't released yet.
It's really good too. I mean, they're killing it.
Yeah, they are.
I thought Rorschach was one of the best portrayed characters in the movie.
He's so good.
I love this character. I love the line. You know the line, Rob. When he was in prison.
You're not it. You're in here with me.
Yes. That line. But it was just the sheer humanity of that character. And even though it was a tortured soul, it was like
very tortured.
He stood by his morals and was willing to sacrifice himself for what he believed in. That's you know what? And when we talk about Alan Moore and we talk about his writing, he does. I put it this way: Alan Moore is very analytical, and he looks at the scientific workings of pretty much everything, and is able to really tell those stories through the knowledge of not only just historical events, but just the science behind certain things.
Yeah.
But he gives us a glimpse of certain characters that do carry emotions for us. Behind everyone who's this superpowered, whatever being, and whatever, you have that one who's willing to stand on morals and sacrifice everything. You know what I mean? Regardless of whatever.
Oh.
And he was like, look, I'd rather just die than to live in the world this way. So that was phenomenal. And his Rorschach was a really, really important and incredible character.
Look, I mean, I have to say that talk about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking tonight. I didn't realize on Twitter you can do what Clubhouse does.
Yeah.
Where you can just set up a thing, and I did that tonight. I'm like, what is this? Twitter's like, you should use our thing where it's like Clubhouse. I didn't even know you could do it. So I'm like, what does it mean to be an imagination connoisseur? Click. And suddenly there's 40 people in my chat. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing, but okay. But which was great. But one of the things that I was talking about, moments in time, and like we were talking about now about storytelling and all that. Even though it was a comic book, one of my favorite moments in any pop culture piece of narrative ever was the end of. It's hard to explain to people now because Watchmen was there were two comic books that I loved so much in the 80s that I was buying because I went to the comic book store for 30 years every Wednesday. And the first comic book that was Camelot 3000. And Camelot 3000 was by Mike Barr and Brian Boland, and it was a retelling of King Arthur in the 3000th century or whatever, year 3000. And the last issue took a year to come out. Like, it was a 12-issue miniseries. It took a year to get the last issue to come out. So when the last issue came out, it was a big deal. That was, but the time at the comic book store, it was Watchmen 11. Watchmen was a 12-issue miniseries, and you're waiting. It's very dense. It's much more dense than the movie. There's a lot more story, and it's all being revealed. And it's now that you've seen the movie. At the end of Watchmen 11, they've gone to Night Owl and Rorschach have gone to Karnak, the Arctic base of Ozymandias, to confront him, and he's revealed as the mastermind. And you think, okay, like every other comic book in the world, the mastermind tells you what he's going to do and all that. At the end of Watchmen 11, it's the last 2 pages, and you've got Night Owl and Rorschach sitting there listening to him monologuing, and Ozymandias says, and you can't believe he's the villain. Mm-hmm. It was shocking. And he's like, he says in the comic, I'm not some Republic serial villain, Dan, because Republic Pictures made Commander Cody and Rocket Man or whatever. They made serials in the 30s and 40s that played in front of movies. Mm-hmm. He's like, I'm not some Republic serial villain, man. Dan, do you think I would explain my master stroke if there was any possibility that you could affect its outcome? Well, I already did it. Yeah. Like, I did it 38 minutes ago. Yeah. And it's so great because then you have this panel of just Rorschach and Dan Dreiberg and as Night Owl, and they're contemplating what he said. Yeah. Like, and you think in comic book tropes that they could stop him from killing millions of people and destroying New York City. And you think it's good, and then
because of their beliefs.
And then you turn the page, and the last page of Watchmen 11 is one of my favorite comic pages ever, because you just see the white, and it's transposing the fact that Karnak is in the Arctic and the wind is blowing and the snow is blowing, and you see Night Owl and Rorschach, our heroes who figured it all out. You see them just on like one frame, and they get obscured by the snow, and you realize, and that's the end of the comic, and that our villain won. The villain is revealed, and he fucking won.
And he won.
You know, he accomplished what he wanted to do. Yeah. And I'll never forget. I mean, I'd never had that experience reading a comic. Well, you know, villains win occasionally, but there was a finality to this. And when I read this, I mean, it was. I remember going home, and I believe it ended when I was in my first year of college. So I'd go home on the weekends, and I'd get my comics and bring them to college and read them. And that was the first one I read. And I wanted, like, no one I knew read comics in college. And I wanted to talk to somebody, but I'm like, you're not going to believe what happened at the end of Watchmen 11.
It was like the first what the fuck moment. Like, oh my God. Like, wow. Like, and the thing is, it was like, but his philosophy behind it was like, I kind of get it,
dude. Like, that was that was the whole thing. It was like,
yeah.
All right, okay. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. I get it. That's all right. Architects of Fear. It's cool.
I have to say really quick. Dennis, what is his name? Dennis
Mason.
He just brought me. I'm sitting here while we're talking, and I'm
Dennis.
trying my hardest not to laugh because he said something in his. And when somebody brings you joy this late and this early in the morning,
Dennis is a bringer of joy.
bro. He said, and now I cannot unsee it. He said the mics look like peepees.
Yes, and he also said I need a study cam.
Oh my God. I've been trying my hardest not to laugh, but it's just like I
Well,
can't.
one that's down and one that's up.
Yeah, well, I would say Lael is well hung, and I'm just a half mast. If you're really looking at it that way. I mean, if you want to think of it.
Is the Watchmen breaking the trope of what we used to see? It did in comics, right?
I think
Yeah.
I think it absolutely broke the trope. That was the whole point. The whole point. The great thing about the Watchmen is, and this is why I don't think that a film adaptation can be entirely. Zack Snyder's desire to be faithful to the adaptation misses the point, because the entire Watchmen is a send up of comic book tropes, and it's a commentary on the comic book medium. So to slavishly want to recreate the comic book in film is a misunderstanding of what the comic book was trying to do. Now, that's not to say there's a lot about. I think The Watchmen is a great recreation of the comic, but I don't think it's a great adaptation of the comic. I think there's a lot of because here's the thing. I love Zack Snyder. I do. I love him as a guy. I love the fact he loves his wife.
Yeah.
I don't think he's an intellect. I think he's great with imagery. He's great with Dawn of the Dead's one of my favorite films in the world. When he was announced as his first feature to remake it, I'm like, who is this fucking Zack Snyder? Fuck that guy. And I've never been so primed to hate a movie in my life. I went into Dawn of the Dead, Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. I was ready to go on a kill rampage throughout the theater and say, how can you defile? And I liked it. I liked it. I watched the first 10 minutes of the movie. I'm like, all right. The opening credits with Johnny Cash when the man comes to town. I'm like, wow. I'm like, this is pretty fucking good. It's not the movie I loved, but it was respectable. James Gunn wrote it. Snyder directed it. I'm like, all right. I will admit, I have hot toys from Sucker Punch.
I also like in The Watchmen when they kind of revisited the original characters, let's say, origination of the characters. If that makes any sense at all. It does not.
No,
what I'd like to see was the original costumes, let's say, from that time period. And I felt that was important, that we saw these iterations of them through history. And that was really cool to see.
It was cool.
It was just, there were a lot of things that were in it. Go ahead,
the thing is with the books, and if you read the comics, what we got from Zack Snyder was definitely an amazing attempt, and it was great, but the books fleshed it out so much more. It was so much more in depth, because the thing is, it was more than just a comedian. It was more than just basically the narration. It was so fleshed out that from page to page, you had to follow, like literally page to page. You're like, it was like one of the episodes. Like, if we put it this way, like what we see now on Disney Plus, whereas we get an episode a week, that's how it was with the comics. It was like, before you got the graphic novel, that's how you had to read it. Like, you didn't know what was coming next. And when you got the graphic novel, you can actually see it fleshed out in the whole. But the way it was written, and Ozymandias, even his story, throughout, you see his journey, and it's like, okay, he's a hero. At the end, we see him as a villain, but to some people, he was still the hero the entire time.
Well, I mean, yeah. Here's what's amazing about that. First of all, the whole story, it was so dense and so interesting.
Yeah.
It was so erudite. You know, it was literature. It truly was. But the whole thing about what Ozymandias was doing, he's like, you know, if you think about it, we're all going to die. So if somebody has to expedite the process to create world peace, so, you know, we're how many people? Almost 7 billion people on the planet. So if you're going to create a calamity that wipes out, I don't know, 10 million people in a night to save 7 billion, is that so bad? No, I would say that's pretty monstrous.
That's
but
terrible. But
it's like, but that's the thing. We're all going to die anyway, and you're cutting people's lives short. But if you really think about it, and again, we all want to believe that we're special or that we have something to offer. But the fact is, how many people does history remember? In all of human history, there have been billions upon billions upon billions of people that have lived on this planet. And how many do you remember? How many people impacted human civilization? Yeah. Compared to how many people lived here?
I really liked in
Not
that
many.
film, and this is this is not really on topic, but I really did like the portrayal of Dr. Manhattan when he leaves Earth. And I don't know why that was
fantastic,
so
though.
But I think the reason why it might have been is because he just had become so different from everyone on Earth that, you know, it was almost as if he was no longer, you know,
human,
an Earthling. Yeah. So he had to go somewhere else and exist in this other dimension, so to speak, or another planet. And I can understand that. Like, I can understand that after a transformation that is so dramatic that you are no longer what you were before. So, you know, it was fun, so much fun in that film. But I think it's interesting that this is an example of a story that breaks the trope, but it's done right. And you know, we're not upset by it because it hasn't destroyed anything that we knew. And
well, it was unto itself, though. You know, it was a self-contained story, even though originally it was based on comic book characters that were previously existing that DC had bought. And DC said, yeah, you know, we don't want you to change those. We don't want the Question to be turned into Rorschach, you know, and we don't want Captain Atom to become Dr. Manhattan. So do your own thing. And he did.
Yeah. And I think it was either you or Lael who had mentioned that scene where he's alone with the guy in the room, and it's such a small room, right, Lael? Like when you look at that scene, you as the observer, you know, I saw this film in a Globe IMAX, you know, which is one of the biggest theaters, you know, one of the largest ways you can see it. But I remember watching it and feeling very confined in that room, and there was no way out.
Yeah.
I think it was in the prison. It might have been in the prison or the prison scene, but you know, I also thought that was very clever, considering I'm watching it on a screen that's, you know, so big. They managed to capture that feeling of confinement, and that, you know, you couldn't escape Rorschach in a way, you know. So I thought that was very clever.
Yeah. I love the bathroom scene and how it was actually shot. It was brilliant. You know, that slow walk in, the guy's backing in, the doors opening and shutting and opening and shutting.
Yes.
And the last thing you see is this blood trickling. It was incredible. I love that scene.
I have to say, the opening when the mysterious intruder enters the comedian's apartment.
Yeah.
When that started, I'm like, I'd never seen a comic book brought to live action life so perfectly. I mean, that sequence was done absolutely perfect. And even when he goes through the window and the slow motion and the way the smiley face button. But I will say this, the problem was that was the problem. It was a slavish recreation. My favorite parts of the movie were the slavish recreations of the graphic novel. And you know, I really like what they did with like Hollis Mason, especially like to me, here's another example, and people think I'm crazy, but my favorite version of Watchmen is still the version that has the animation in it, the ultimate cut.
Yeah.
But it also is my biggest problem with Watchmen. So in the Watchmen universe, they didn't have comic books about costumed heroes because costumed heroes were real. Mm-hmm. So there were these interludes with like pirate comics. Mm-hmm. And pirate comics are real, so Alan Moore in the Watchmen was paying homage to pirate comics. Mm-hmm. And so you actually have a kid who is reading, he goes to the newsstand in the comic book and in the ultimate edition of the movie, and he's reading these pirate comics. Mm-hmm. So in the ultimate edition of the film, they add these animated sequences of pirate comics. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that's not, the kid isn't reading, and it takes up like a half an hour of the movie. Mm-hmm. They put all these, and I'm like, yeah, but the point is not the actual story he's reading. The story is great, and it does have relevance, but the point is he's reading a comic that isn't about superheroes. Again, it's about the medium of comic books. Mm-hmm. And so when you see it recreated as animation in the ultimate version of the movie, it doesn't work because that's not what it's supposed to be doing. The point is not the story he's reading. The point is that, I mean, there is a bit of that, but the movie doesn't benefit from having the kid wasn't reading animation. He was reading a comic book. And yet now we're watching minutes-long scenes of animation from this comic, which wasn't the medium he was reading. So it's really weird that suddenly there's these animated sequences. This is the Ultimate Edition now, which I do like, but it's still weird. I'm like, this doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
So sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to think of some other comics that break the tropes that we know. And maybe that's why we like comics, because they do tend to break tropes, but they don't destroy what we enjoyed previously. And so, obviously, as you always say,
usually it depends what run of a I mean, within the one run of a comic, you can have one creator come on and suddenly it's destroyed.
Yeah. But I mean, so if it's still the same creator's run, it tends to be maintained a bit more. And but there's a lot into the comics. So when you get these adaptations, it's just a fraction of what was in the comics. So that's another thing to think about too. And The Watchmen was a long film. That had a lot of stuff in it. But I thought that the overall feel of the film was just so good that it just felt good watching it. And even if I didn't care for everything in it, I was always satisfied with it. So that was very interesting.
And I still watch it. To be honest, I do like watching Watchmen. Yeah, it's one of. What did you guys think of the HBO series?
I loved it. I really did love it. And I loved that they made references to the actual event that took place in the comics. With the creature, the giant, squid, like I liked that they made references, to that. The only thing that really threw me off was the end. That's the thing that kind of like, I was like, okay, I understand the attempt. But there are certain things that you are changing and reshaping to fit a television series that never happened in the books. And I always have to remind myself is that, that adaptation, of course, is going to be different. They're trying to tell a new story, separating itself from the events that not separating itself, but expanding on the events, but then doing something totally different. I did not at all understand the transference of power.
I know.
That's the part that didn't get me at all. But before that, everything else that happened and her portrayal was great. His portrayal was great. The storytelling and how they, him. It was more fleshed out of him explaining how he is in so many different places at once.
Yeah.
That portion of it I absolutely loved, and I found it extremely fascinating because his concept of time didn't exist because he's everywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that I understood, but there is no way that someone at that immense level of power could have been destroyed the way he was in this show.
No,
And I'll leave that up to everybody else who hasn't seen it. They want to go back
I
and
haven't
watch
seen it
again.
yet.
Oh, you
oh,
haven't
you
seen
know,
it yet?
it's first of all,
I'm sorry about the sorry. I'm so
No,
sorry.
it's
I thought
okay.
you saw it.
I won't remember any of that, but
Yeah.
it's
I'm gonna
really no.
Yeah,
You gotta watch it because
You definitely gotta watch it.
it's. I think it's a fascinating show. It's really goofy. Like there's a lot. They play it very straight, but there's a lot of really goofy stuff in it.
Yeah.
And it's like weird, surreal, which I don't necessarily like because it feels like you're watching in a way kind of a strange Terry Gilliam parody of the X-Men or the X-Men, the Watchmen at the time, and the
Okay.
X-Men, it is, but you got to watch it because there's a lot of really audacious stuff in it. Regina King, Queen, she's so good in it.
Yeah.
And the actors are all really good in it, but the end of it, like you said, Lael, the end of it,
it made no
I
sense.
find it really distasteful too, because here's a show that they've bent over backwards to make it quote unquote woke, and yet they still have one of the oldest tropes in the world, turning a Japanese / Vietnamese / Korean / Chinese person and turning them into the villain. And then, spoiler alert, perhaps that person doesn't make it out alive. And I thought that was the worst kind of racial tokenism. And they play that out. Not that it's not. Look, I think it's a hot mess, but there's so much great stuff in it. It's totally worth watching, and it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So,
But I think when you watch that, so here's what I would tell you. You saw Lovecraft Country, right?
yes.
Okay. Lovecraft is brilliant.
yeah,
Now that's a brilliant show.
based on
So
a
I
great
want you
book.
Based on an amazing book. So I want you, and I'm so gutted that they're not going to continue. But here's the thing.
But there's no other
Well,
book.
Yeah, I know, but it was so rich. And but here's the thing: the creator. Okay, so that's a different story. But watch Watchmen or the series, and then compare the two.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
I want you to watch that and then watch. And if you've already seen Lovecraft, you'll see similarities, but I think that you'll value one more when you watch. And because you've watched the Watchmen film, when you watch this series, you're going to be like, what was that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what? But not saying it's not. The introduction and how everything was in the beginning was quite well. It was done well. But then when you start getting to the end of it in certain parts, you're like, interesting choice. So
Yeah.
I would just watch it, and then tell me what you think.
Yeah, it's fascinating. By the way, if nothing else, it's bonkers. It's a bonkers show. The Magic Butt sends in a tip. It says, "Do you remember the show Unsolved Mysteries?" I do.
Yes.
I remember one episode about a haunted house that still gives me nightmares to this day. Man, that was a creepy theme too. You know what? I agree with everything you said. The Magic Butt. I agree. What do you guys think? Yay? Nay?
You mean about Unsolved Mysteries in
Yeah.
general?
The song, the show, the theme song.
I've watched it. I've Robert Stack, I guess, is one of the
Yep.
hosts, and
Yep.
a
Yeah.
number of different ones. And I like when they give you the update and they let you know that they were able to solve, a crime or something.
Yeah.
Man, that show was spooky to watch at night, and the music, it was spooky as hell to watch at night. Literally was. When you hear that, it was spooky. And then I used to hate watching the pictures that were drawn, and yeah, it was spooky. It was some spooky shit.
I agree.
Yeah.
Mark O'Brien says, I don't know if I agree with you here, Mark. The Godfather is the story of a father doing good and a son doing bad. Star Wars is the reverse. George Lucas is flipping Francis. Mark, I got to say, I don't agree with you. Here's the thing. The son isn't doing bad. When Michael takes over the family, Vito didn't want that for his son. Michael was on the straight and narrow. He's a war hero. He's going to be a lawyer. He wasn't going to be a bad man. What happened was when his father and his family was threatened, he had to stand up, and because he had leadership qualities, he was of pure heart, and he had to stand up and save the family. But the thing is, he used intellect and thoughtfulness. What he was lacking, what Michael Corleone didn't have, was his father's heart. And the reason Vito could rule the way he did, and the reason that he ran the family the way he did, and the reason it worked so well, was because he had a heart. He had emotion. And Michael was too cool and calculating and logical. And that's why he lost the family, because he didn't have his father's heart. And I don't think he was necessarily, yeah, they were in the criminal underworld, but all things being equal, just like his father, you want to do business with me, I'll do business with you. You fuck with me, I'll fuck with you. And I think part of what happened is America lost its way in terms of doing good business. And that's what The Godfather's about. Just do what you say you're going to do and do good business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah.
Are there any other super chats, Robert?
Yes, there are. Just one more. S Beam says, "Off to bed. Great stream. Stay metal. You three."
Sean Beam. S Beam.
That's right. S Beam. The man. He's an action figure creator.
Yes.
And Robert, that included the stream elements as well, right?
Yes, that's everything.
Okay. Excellent.
As they said in the professional, everyone, everything, yeah. But so, like, I think I want to keep this stream to 3 hours. It's good if we keep it to 3 hours. We're getting there.
That's fine. That's
Yes.
20 minutes, because I have to do a Zoom call with our members and all that.
Yes.
But obviously, storytelling has meant a lot to the two of you.
Yes.
I would ask you this. How do you two define yourselves through storytelling?
Oh man. You know what? No, ladies first.
Oh, okay. Well,
we got to continue with the theme from last night. So ladies first.
Oh, thank you, Lael.
I always say that in all things, but that's what she said. She'll tell you.
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I think that, like, for example, in the article where they clearly said that although they suggest a moralistic view, it's hard to get a general audience to decide which moralistic view they may choose to take. And so if the storytelling is compelling enough that it can make you question things that you weren't going to question originally when you went into it, then it's a very good story. But I have to say that for me, I like to see a story that has to have some sort of romance in it. Now, I have to be very careful when I say this. It doesn't have to be, full on, hot and heavy scenes and everything, but there has to be like some sort of love.
No, emotional romance.
Yeah, there has to be something in it for me to make it feel satisfying. Like I have to get that from the story. Now, I do read stories that don't have that. It's true. And I push for stories that don't have that element. But it still feels like I feel like I need to see it. And I'm not quite sure why that is.
When you say you need to see it, what do you mean by that?
I need to know that it exists. So it could be off camera,
Are you talking about sexuality or emotion? Love.
Maybe both. And we don't have to see all the details, but I have to know that there's an element of it in the story. So there has to be some sort of interest. We don't have to see the whole relationship.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think you want, that's one of the reasons we want to see those things. More importantly, feel them.
Yes, and I look for them, like I'm searching for it in a story, and I think that's why Jane Austen stories are so appealing to me. For example, is because a lot of times in the story, there's always a character that's, let's say someone's trying to get married or something to that degree, and there's that romance and chatting up somebody and trying to figure out whether or not that person is going to end up with you or not, and it is a fun foray in romance in a sense, but oftentimes the outcome is not what you want it to be. Like, for example, in Sense and Sensibility, where one of the main characters behaves, rather badly.
Yeah.
And despite having been told that, it didn't even go very far, but, the person kind of took it too far themselves and, kind of embarrassed themselves a little bit. And we all kind of make mistakes in love. So I thought that was a very interesting, like, okay, how would you describe making a mistake in 1860? Well, this is how you describe it,
right.
The way Jane Austen described it. But today it would be like, maybe you ghosted somebody and you actually like the person and now you change your mind and they're like, well, you ghosted me. And that's kind of like, I don't speak to people who ghost me anymore. Like those sorts of relationship turmoils. And how does that fit into science fiction, fantasy, and horror? It does, because I think that in horror, romance and sexuality can be used to put a more humanistic side on a horror film, so to speak. I always think about in the Autopsy of Jane Doe, and how sexuality
God, I love that movie.
That film, and how it's not obscene. It's just a body that you're looking at.
I you know what? Thank you for bringing up that film. That movie's, I think, genius. It's a genius film on so many levels, and like you pointed out, it's very funny because the sexuality, as you're looking at a beautiful dead cadaver, and it really, the director knows. He's like, I get it. You're turned on. And he plays with that, and it's part of why that movie is so great. It's so great.
It is, and I think that it enhances the horror film in a sense, because the gentlemen who work in this in that particular mortuary look at bodies all day long.
Yeah.
And so they had to find some way to differentiate the importance of this particular body. Well, the major thing that stands out to me is how pristine she looks, even when buried in straight soil, so to speak, or I don't know what you would call it, but let's just say the human flesh wouldn't look like that if it were just normal human flesh being buried in someone's basement. I mean,
but is it normal human flesh?
It isn't. But the point is that
spoiler alert.
Oh, sorry. I just like that they explored that notion of, they said, hey, why don't we just make her look pristine?
Yeah.
And someone saying, no, you can't do that. I'm like, no, let's do it. Let's show her in the dirt, but let's show her body pristine in the dirt. Like, you would never, ever see that, but you see it. I'm sorry, guys, for the spoiler. And so looking at that, even Star Wars has, romance. And I admit to rewinding the parts where, Anakin and Padme hook up. I admit to that. I admit to seeing it a bazillion times. And when Anakin comes back in Revenge of the Sith, and she tells him that, I think it's in Revenge of the Sith, when she tells him that there's such great news and there, she's expecting a baby. Like, I've watched that. I've rewound that a bazillion times.
Of course.
So I want to see those things. We're not seeing anything more than that, but I want to see it. Yeah. So I love that. I love that that's an element in the story. So if I could define something, I would say it would be to incorporate it. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be the dominant factor in the story, but it feels like there should be some kind of element to it in a story. Now, if I'm looking at the story like The Cube, where people are trapped inside of this cube, maybe we don't need it in a story like that.
Although we needed an ending. I would love to have a instead of just an ambiguous ending, but I agree with you. I do agree with you.
So I do admit that it has a time and a place in a story, but it certainly is something that's really important to me. And I look for it and I say, okay, that's all right. If it doesn't have it and it's a good story and it doesn't require it. Sex, lies, and videotape. We never see any of the sex really, except for maybe a little bit in one part where the character kind of has to find this guy because she's so aroused, you know. But generally speaking, a lot of it is kind of, you're watching it in discovery, right? You're watching the videotape. And so that was another thing where they talk about an experience, and that was important, and that was what made it appealing.
And it was yes. And I was going to say the story. You know, I think about those kinds of movies, and when men and women and sexuality and infidelity and crazy. I mean, those kinds of stories, like Eyes Wide Shut, that was also part of the QAnon thing, is really about a man. If you think about Eyes Wide Shut, it's about a guy who's like, he's like, I can't believe you fantasize about another woman. I'm leaving.
Yes. And
you know, and
I found, for me, Eyes Wide Shut meant that it was all about the wife and how she wanted to be with other people. And so I think that, you know, like... But
did she really want to be with other people?
Yes, she did, yes.
I think she just was fantasizing about it, like everybody does.
Okay. Yeah,
it is okay.
Like,
and I think that's what... I don't necessarily think she would... I think what was funny about that... why I like that movie is, again, Kubrick's last film, because I think they really did love one another. And I think that what she was admitting to, she's like, look, I love you. And I don't think she would ever break the bonds of her marriage, but she just flat out told him, she said, look, I love you, but I'm a human being. I'm a sexual creature. And if I see somebody or run scenarios through my head, she's like, look, dude, I run sexual scenarios through my head every single day of my life.
Yes.
As you do. Don't admit you. And it was honest. And she was honest about it. And it was about a man who had to come to grips with here his wife finally is completely intimate with him and says, here's what I'm telling you the reality of what's going on. Nothing happened, but and then he had to reconcile the fact, like, I can't even deal with my wife telling me the truth, even though she's not done anything wrong. And he's just like, I can't deal with it. And yet he spends the entire movie being tempted by every nymphette. I mean, they're all allegorical creatures of fantasy, but every woman that comes into his path tempts him. You know, and he's like sitting there the whole time going, hey, how are you? You know, he's thinking about it the whole time. What she told him that she was doing, he spends the rest of the movie dealing with and coming to grips with the fact that, wow, my wife didn't do shit. She just told me that she wanted to fuck some dude. And now,
what about the fact that her nude scene, Nicole Kidman's nude scene, is very different from, let's say, I liked that type of nude scene because it's not the same type of nude scene that you see where you're kind of watching someone with another person. This one is in a sense where she's kind of looking or it's a suggestive scene where she's inviting you. And when I say you, I mean the observer who is watching the film. The comfortableness of her nudity is very appealing. Like it's incredibly, satisfying to see that, rather than her kind of coyly she's just relaxed and it's fun. And I think that is the type of stuff that I think is really very interesting, because we're not confronted with any sort of shame associated with it. And so
it's also, it wasn't, I mean, it was between a husband and wife. It was when you're married to somebody, it was showing true intimacy. the fact that, look, I'm into redheads, so that her nude scenes were incredibly beautiful, but they weren't sexual. You know, it's like they played it out in the trailer. He comes up behind her. It's not like they don't even have a sex scene in the film.
That's right, but it's still very satisfying.
It is. I mean, because Nicole Kidman's beautiful and all that. And it's so interesting because I think the movie plays with our Again, it comes back to story, and I loved the fact that I totally identify with Eyes Wide Shut, because here's a guy, you know, he thinks he's got everything, and at the end of the day, his wife comes clean and says, I had this fantasy about this thing that happened a long time ago. Typical guy. Oh, I can't deal with it. And I'm like, dude, she married you. You've had kids together.
How about The Wheel of Time, which is a series that I'm reviewing with Stubble McShave, and in the story, let's say in the adaptation.
Well, wait, I gotta ask Lael. Lael, have you seen Eyes Wide Shut?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I saw it a long time ago. Yeah. Definitely.
I mean, I don't know if you dug it. I mean, Stanley Kubrick's my favorite director, and Eyes Wide Shut is probably his most maligned film.
Yeah, it was such a play on, you know, a really really good play on temptation, on basically us as the viewers' temptation as we're watching this. You know what I mean? Like it really really did play on it. To the simple fact that it explored, like you said, the level of sexuality, the level of temptation, without even really showing us. It showed us the human anatomy, but it didn't show us the intercourse. It didn't show us the actual action of it. It left us as the viewer, it's our imagination of what we thought might have took place, even when we see it through his eyes, in her eyes. So I think in that, you know, form, it was, because I remember, like, when the film was released, right before it was released, and when it was actually coming up to its release, it was like probably one of the most talked about films, because you had both Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, who were married at the time, in a film that we had never seen, or we would never thought we could ever seen between them, and never thought that something that would, you know, really be displayed the way it was. It was huge. So I really loved the way they did that. I love the way, you know, but at the same time, the way the film was beautifully shot, to be quite honest.
Oh no,
it was amazing. It was beautifully shot.
It was certainly, yes. Yeah. And I thought that for me, as I mentioned to you and Robert already, for me, the film really did represent for me, it was all about the wife. That's what this film was about. And I know that they focus on the husband, but I really liked that the film focused on her so much, because
and rightfully so.
Yeah, I thought it was nicely done, and I also think that it was nice to kind of explore the relationship between a man and a woman in a different way.
I absolutely. What I find, like, I would consider myself a student of Star Trek and human sexuality. Those are the two things that I find fascinating, and what I find so interesting about human sexuality is, if you really think about it, it's pretty goofy. Like, human sexuality is all in our minds. It's all in our heads. And it is attached to tools that we use that are on one hand, they're practical because they are procreation. But on the other hand, because if that's all we did, then we'd procreate once a year or whatever, or once every 5 years, and we'd be done with it. But intimacy, human intimacy, because we're sentient beings and we can talk to one another and we can understand one another, and we've created this entire ritualistic behavior around our reproductive process, which I am both delighted by, but I also find it strange as fuck. It's so weird. And even in Star Trek, the original Star Trek, there's an episode called By Any Other Name, where the Enterprise is infested by these, they've been captured by these people from the Andromeda Galaxy that are not human, but they've just taken human form. And one of them, Barbara Boucher, is one of the hottest chicks that's ever been on TV ever. And she's in the Star Trek episode, And she's talking to Kirk. She's like, I don't understand this biological function that's a simple procreation act. That why is it you people spend so much time writing poems and making movies and, it's all around this simple biological act I don't even understand. And what's funny about it is, because she didn't, because in her realm, in her universe, these giant tentacled creatures that they really were just wouldn't have the same relationship to one another the way human beings do. And now she's taken the guise of a beautiful woman. Kirk's like, let me show you. Let me show you what the simple biological act is all about, which is the most misogynistic, chauvinist thing. It's like, boom, chicken, boom, boom, lady.
Well, what about
until you've had me?
What about Forbidden Planet, where Leslie Nielsen, goes to this planet, and when he gets there, the daughter is kind of like,
Alta,
all like giving him attention.
Alta, the daughter.
Well, she's the only one on the planet with the father, and like once you start to realize, I'm like, gee, she's kind of paying a lot of attention to this Leslie Nielsen character, and it's because she's lonely. Like, she wants to have a relationship with someone, and it's.
And what's so funny about it, if you watch Forbidden Planet, Anne Francis as Alta, first of all, she's sexy as hell. She's clearly read every single book ever written on human sexuality. She's read the Kama Sutra. She's read The Joy of Sex. She knows, and if you watch her portrayal, she knows everything there is to know about human sexuality, except one thing. She's never had a partner to practice it with. She is a horny little girl that is probably the dirtiest girl you'd ever meet, because she's read all of the literature. And when you watch the movie, she clearly comes off, she knows exactly what she's doing. And yet, she, on one hand, she's still naive, but on the other hand, she's like, I read about what you boys want. You are dirty. And it's funny because she kind of plays it that way. And yet, at one point, she's like, she all gets naive, like, well, I didn't know you wanted this. And, Leslie Nielsen's like, come on. And the audience is like, come on.
Yeah.
You're totally playing with him because you know exactly what's up. So.
But that was also another example. It is science fiction style story, but clearly there's a romance that's budding, or however it ends. I can't remember how it ends, but just to say that it does make it very interesting, because that was the last thing I thought was going to happen to Leslie Nielsen as he went on the planet.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. And sure enough, she was, as soon as she saw him, her eyes actually lit up. Like,
yeah, I've got daddy issues, and you're my silver fox, even though he wasn't. He was, whatever.
So I like the romance. I like that sort of thing. I have also read other novels and things, and I was watching, as I was saying before, about the Wheel of Time, and in the Wheel of Time there are some characters that are romantically involved, but in the television adaptation we see some what may or may not be situations of intimacy. And I was talking to Stubble about the idea of the importance of intimacy in the series. And it's like, we want to see intimacy. We want to see connections between certain characters, and that they have something to protect, or, that it makes their lives worthwhile to have that level of intimacy. So, that's also something that's very interesting.
Lael, if we're going to take this home, it's now 3:00.
Yeah.
Good show. I gotta throw it to you to take us home on this. So I would ask you, the idea of romance, the idea of love, I've noticed that obviously you have a very important woman in your life. You've got also, and you've got daughters, you've got family members. How do stories help us define our relationships with people, loved ones, close family members? How important is storytelling to you in terms of that? Like, when something happens between you and LaToya, do you guys share stories together, things that you remember and that bonded you get, or your daughter might tell you something that you did, like, Dad, do you remember the time you did this? And you're like, did I? Yeah. Well, it was clearly, now it's a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does that work? How does that work?
It works in so many different ways. For us, one of the biggest things, is reliving the moments that we've experienced, just from the beginning, from, us meeting, us, us being together, up until, now, and then actually going back and reliving those moments. Like that's like one of the most, one of the best moments like we have is like is when we would go back to like the store At Home. We go to At Home and we just go in and just look around, look at different things. I remember when the grand opening of that place here, we went and spent 3 hours in this place. Now, my 3 hours and probably only brought a few things, but it was just a moment
Yeah.
that, really kind of captured everything. And we could actually document that. It was documented, for us as one of those moments and stories that we can actually, they always say, my dad used to always say that my mom used to always say the greatest story ever told is a story that you can share with everyone else and you can continue to share it. And those stories are basically passed down. So for us, it's always, stories. And even like we see in the beauty of like, even like stories that we see in, whether we read them or storytelling on film, in film, is that it might take you back to a moment that they relive a moment that you relive just from a different perspective. And it's like, wow, like that is something that we've gone through or something that we've lived through, whether good or bad, and how they're able to relate, that to the viewer, is something that's completely amazing. Like when when you talk about sexuality, I look at relationship not just from the sexual point or the sex. It's just the pure fact that you might see somebody who you were just extremely in love with, and you see that as like, yo, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to cement that love. And you see it in storytelling, like,
Yeah.
or one of those things where, like, I forget what is it. One of my favorite films. I talked about it before. Is when you have someone, two friends that have known each other for years, female and male, and him not and completely oblivious to the simple fact that she loved him all this time, but his love or his infatuation was for another person. It wasn't love, it was infatuation because
Yep.
everyone else deemed this person as the popular person, whereas love was staring him right in the face the entire time. Those stories are stories that I can relate to because it's like, when we look at it, it's like, we search far and
Yeah.
wide where it's so close to us. So how it's portrayed on film, how the family value, in film is basically portrayed, and how we actually associate that to our, the way we live. Like when you basically see like a couple wake up in the morning, they're making coffee, they're making breakfast for their kids, taking their kids to school, and then they're going about their way. I'm like, well, we don't really do it that way, but what if we did? You know what I mean? Like, how would it basically play out? You know what I mean? Our lives would basically live totally different. I mean, I work from home. Like, I have my own thing going, so I don't have to worry about, she has her own thing going. The kids basically, now they're going to be going back to school in January. They're going to go back into in the class, but they've been working from home the entire time. But when we look at these films, it's like you go back and you're forced to look at these stories and how you associate them with your own life. It lets you know that the writer and the person who actually saw the story fully, just they are the thing is, it's like you see that these people aren't superhuman, they're human.
Right.
And they're taking qualities from everyday life to make, whether it's science fiction, maybe it's a drama, maybe it's a horror film, maybe it's a thriller, but they're taking things from life and incorporating them into film. And
Yeah.
what they wanted, they do it in a way that it's so like just the tug of war with emotions is something that we associated, with our own lives. So that's, to me, the importance of a good story that's actually told. Fortunate for me that I gravitate to a lot of science fiction and whatever, but even still, like those stories I relate to because it's the struggle with emotions to save and to be selfless, to basically say that I'm willing to give my life, whether it's for love, family, or whatever. Those are the stories that I basically gravitate closer to. So.
Yeah. Well put, man. That was
Yeah, well
extremely well put. Well, listen, the three of you, actually two of you, the three of us. I like the fact that we keep this 3 hours. We can still go to bed. I have the members of this channel. If you're a member of the Burnettwork, we have our 11 o'clock Zoom meetings, which I get to hang out with you guys for 3 hours or whatever and talk, whatever. We're doing that tomorrow, or actually later today. I want to thank Lael Rockwell and Mmmm. I've really come to love these streams. I feel like they're really worthwhile. I think people like them, and we really do some deep dives into some things that we all part of the Post-Geek singularity or the greater fandom community are doing great stuff together. So thank you, both of you. I want to thank our moderators. Mmmm is not only a guest, she also moderates. And and Tom Jr. Jackson, he is a goof person because we're all goof people. So thank you, Tom. I know that Richard was in here.
Twin Flicks, I think.
Twin Flicks. Okay, Twin, will you hear? Thank you. Appreciate that. I want to thank all of you who generously support the channel through super chats and tips. Thank you. And memberships means a lot. Keeps us going. It's all good. I would subscribe, or I would ask you to subscribe to Lael. Where can people subscribe to you on social media?
Oh, they can basically find me at the 1/6 Scale Man YouTube channel, as well as 1/6 Scale Man on Instagram as well. So if you haven't already, get over to that Instagram page and subscribe as well. But yeah, actually 1/6 Scale Man YouTube channel, where we have coming up this Sunday will be the Take Your Position with Iron Logan. We will be posing up Deadpool. So that's going to actually be the figure of choice this weekend. So that's it's strictly going to be phenomenal. I cannot wait for that. Monday is going to be Comic Book Talk with Friends, where we're going to actually break down the episode 3 of Hawkeye, which was an amazing episode. It's a lot of spoilers there, so there's going to be a spoiler talk on Monday. If you don't want to hear it, you don't want to be there, but if you want to hear it, that's the place to be. Also on Wednesday, we will actually again have Say What, which we dive into like this collectibles.
Love it.
Yeah, everything when it comes to collectibles, figures, whether it's statues, figures, 12 scale, doesn't really matter. We talk about it. So, welcome there. And every other Thursday, which we came off of our very amazing, last night's episode of Uncivilized Scoundrels was completely amazing. I loved it. We have some interesting talk there, and we had such an amazing panel of guests like last night. We just all came together and it gelled so well, so you can see that as well. So yeah, those are the shows that will actually, and also I will have Take Your Position, personal videos basically where I just put out figures. I don't do, my review is posing. So when I do my reviews, it's just mainly on posing the figure, and that's how you can figure it out and see whether or not I like it.
Sure, absolutely.
But yeah, that's so subscribe to the 1/6 Scale Man YouTube channel, as well as the 1/6 Scale Man on Instagram and Twitter. Yep.
And you have your own new show now?
I have my own channel. Yes, it's called Positive Fandom, which you can subscribe to. I'm covering a lot of fandom IPs, including The Wheel of Time, including The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2 leading up to the Book of Boba Fett, movies, as well as interviews. We're even going to be doing Into the Snyderverse, which is an upcoming series soon with Russ Whitfield. Yes, it's going to be an in-depth. So for those of you who love the Snyderverse, you've got to come and check it out on my channel. You can also find me on Monday nights on Toxic Femininity. And as Lael said, every other Thursday, I'm on Uncivilized Scoundrels, where we talk Star Wars. And we had a great show last night. Also, on Fridays, occasionally you can find me on Midnight's Edge in the morning. And
you do Midnight's Edge and Midnight Metal on Friday? You're fucking metal. Fucking metal.
And Midnight Metal, you can always find me here on the Burnettwork. Here on the show on Friday nights with Lael and Robert.
Illish shows
and
on
with
midnight
all of you.
Fridays. Yes.
That's fun.
On the Burnettwork.
By the way, Tom Jr. Jackson, who's moderating, I love the fact that I get people to work for me and then they send me tips. It's amazing.
That was very generous of him.
Amazing.
Very generous
So
of you,
Tom, thank you for that, you goof person, you.
And shout out to Dennis, man. Thank you for making me laugh tonight. I needed that, and you made me laugh.
Dennis Mason is one funny dude.
Thank you for
superstar, bro. You are flat out
Thank-
superstar, and I loved it.
Thank you, Dennis, for offering your healing hands.
Yes, yes, yes. Dennis is amazing, man.
Tom does say, great show, gang. Well, thank you. And it was a great show. This is fun. This is exactly what I wanted it to be. So I want to thank you both for being on Midnight Metal. Yes, Robservations has been sporadic. It's going to come back. And, whining about movies, it's all coalescing.
Yes.
I'm about, what's really interesting is that I'm ending season 3 of Robservations. I can't believe it. I've done it for 3 years now. We are coming up, I think next week is the 3-year anniversary of Robservations.
Wow, Robert, congratulations.
Yeah, it's
Congrats,
crazy.
bro.
It's crazy. And then the 800th episode is coming up soon, next month.
Yes.
And I've been doing this morning show. It's fun to do. It's a lot of work, like I said. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing it. It was kind of an experiment. I don't know if the experiment's really worked, but people like it. But still, it's too much work for I don't know if enough yield, and it's not an evergreen show. But whatever, we'll see. That's what YouTube is. You experiment. But I'm going to be redoubling my efforts for the channel and everybody who's supporters. Like that's why we do the Zoom calls like tomorrow or later today, which we're doing in less than 7 hours or 7.5 hours, whatever. It's fine, but it's great. And I think shows like this and streaming with the two of you has been so much fun, and it means so much to me.
It's been great to be here,
And
Robert.
thank
I
you
love
both.
being here. This is my Friday morning coffee, man. I can't wait. I love it.
Well,
And-
Lael
and-
Rockwell. Oh, go ahead.
I forgot to mention, Robert, I'm also doing a real-time series with Stubble McShave, which we're going to continue episode 5. So those of you who are Wheel of Time fans, and also a review of Arcane with Dieter Bastian.
Wow, nice. Arcane's pretty good too.
Yes, yes.
Well, kids, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls, gentle beings across the 28 known galaxies, however you identify. Remember, on this channel and in life, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen.
Yes.
And on that note, I want to thank my esteemed collaborators, Lael Rockwell, 1/6 Scale Man, and was it Positive Fandom?
Positive Fandom, Robert.
Positive Fandom. Go
yes,
subscribe, like these channels.
Thank you.
Show them the love. Show them the love. That's what we do here. And tomorrow night, or later tonight, or actually tomorrow, Midnight Metal, I don't quite know what it's going to be. Who knows? That's why it's metal. You don't know what it's going to be. But we will see. I will be doing a Zoom call and Robservations later today. And, of course, let's get physical media with Dieter on Sunday, as always.
Yes, yes.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you for being a part of Midnight Metal, episode 67, part 2. Because 67, part 1 may or may not have existed. You had to have been there. And on that note, I will say to all of you, have a better night and a better day.
Good night.